jurors who will hear all the factual evidence and make a final determination on the cause of death in this tragic case. The coroner's inquest will include the presentation of evidence as well as the testimony of many witnesses. Some of the witnesses are experts in their chosen field. The inquest will also include a chronological order of the Hart family moving from state to state, as well as a chronological order of the route that the Hart family took when traveling from Washington to Mendocino County, and ultimately to their death. Our investigation included contacting many government entities, but I certainly want to thank the Clark County Sheriff's Office in Washington and the California Highway Patrol for their steadfast assistance in obtaining the facts of this case. I would like to thank the many government entities who assisted us in our investigation in our quest to know the truth.
All set. Thank you. Good morning. We are on the record in the matter of the deaths of Jennifer Hart, Sarah Hart, Markis Hart, Jeremiah Hart, Abigail Hart, Ciera Hart, Hannah Hart, and Devonte Hart. Please, it's very important that all cell phones be turned off, all electronic devices be turned off. By California rules of court, this matter cannot be recorded under any circumstances without the permission of the presiding judge. In this case, the presiding judge has given permission for the videotaping in this court, but no one else has permission to videotape, audio tape, or anything. Very important that be complied with. All right, we have the 14 jurors in place. Yesterday we had jury selection. We have 14 jurors in place. This matter is a formal coroner's inquest, and it is an inquiry into the death and deaths of 8 individuals. My name is Matthew Guichard. I'm the hearing officer who's been retained by the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office to conduct this particular hearing. I have, I'd say, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 coroner's inquests that I've conducted over the course of the past few years. By law in the state of California, the coroner, the county coroner, the sheriff coroner can order an inquiry into the death of an individual, and it's quite appropriate in this particular case that the sheriff of Mendocino County has ordered that an inquiry into these deaths take place. I do want to emphasize that this hearing is not adversarial, and what that means is there won't be lawyers standing up and objecting or anything such as that. At least we hope so. But at any rate, I'm going to be asking all the questions here today, and I will conduct this. I've read a very comprehensive investigation of this matter, a number of reports, and I'm in a position to ask the questions of the various witnesses. I'm going to plow a little ground that we already plowed yesterday with the jury. I want to remind them, and also for the record, I'm going to read off the witness list that I've decided we're going to call based on the information that they have. I want to reread it. We're going to call Officer M. Covington from the California Highway Patrol, Officer A. Sanchez from the California Highway Patrol, Deputy R. Julian of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, J. Cheney, Search and Rescue of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, Dr. Greg D. Pizarro, a medical doctor, a forensic pathologist who conducted a number of autopsies on some of those names that I mentioned when I first announced the case. Detective A. Beck of the Clark County Sheriff's Office, and that's in Washington State. Officer T. Roloff of the California Highway Patrol, a mate officer, and you'll find out what mate means when he testifies. Investigator Jay Slates of the California Highway Patrol, the Investigative Services Unit, and Lieutenant Shannon Barney of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Now, members of the jury, as I mentioned yesterday, you may be hearing a number of other names of witnesses or officers, people involved. In a coroner's inquest such as this, we allow hearsay, so in some cases, I'll be asking a witness to testify as to what they know and then perhaps what else they've heard from another officer or relying on other reports, and there's nothing unusual about that at all. As I said, I'll be calling the appropriate witnesses as the hearing officer, and I'll be asking all the questions. These hearings are open to the public. So coroner's inquests under the government code are open to the public. We don't exclude anyone. So the public is invited. The media certainly is invited, and I'm aware that some media people are here today. Friends and family, oftentimes, of people that I've mentioned who are decedents in this particular case are invited to attend. There's nothing unusual about anyone. With that in mind, though, I want to indicate what I said yesterday. It's very important that we keep the appearance of propriety, and so we don't want the appearance of impropriety, and what that means is please have no contact with anyone in the audience, and in the audience, please have no contact with anyone on the jury or witnesses during the course of this, other than a polite hello. But even if you're talking about matters, such mundane matters as the baseball season is starting or something, I would ask you please not to do that, because that does potentially give the appearance of impropriety, and the jurors are going to decide this case based only on the evidence that comes in from the stand in this case and various exhibits that we will have marked. A couple of them are up here, and we'll have a number of them over the course of this. And we never want to have what we call normally the 13th juror. In this case, we've impaneled 14 jurors. That's not alternates. We're going to have 14 jurors, and I'll just remind you that the government code allows in a coroner's inquest anywhere from 9 to 15 jurors. And I say in excess of caution, we have chosen 14 jurors, just in case somebody gets sick, something happens, that we always have the appropriate number that we need. All right. Your contact for all purposes will be Mr. Biggs here, Cynthia Bartley of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, or Sergeant Snitches. And so if anything arises, anything unusual, or you need anything, please contact them. And during the course of this hearing, those are the people you talk to. So as I say, if there's something important that needs to come to my attention, you contact them and bring it to my attention. We have you seated in the order almost that we had yesterday. We have the same 14. We've made a couple of little changes. But I'm going to refer to, if I have to, and I don't think that I will, by the number that you're seated in. And it will be the same as yesterday. So juror number 7, who was number 7 yesterday, is number 7 today, even though juror number 7 is sitting in a different seat. As I said, we are going to take yesterday, and I'll just for the audience, we'll take breaks generally every hour on the hour. We try to do that as best we can, and that accommodates witnesses, it certainly accommodates the juror, and most importantly, it accommodates the court reporter. So what I like to say when I ask people to turn off all their devices, we have a very competent court reporter who is taking down everything that is being said here when I say we're on the record. So when you heard me say on the record, that is the cue for the court reporter to start, excuse me, taking down everything that is said. And when I say we're off the record, she stops. We also have, this matter is being, my understanding, videotaped and live streamed, and the same would apply when I say we're on the record. That is the cue for the videographer to start videotaping. When I say we're off the record, the same. Under the court order from the presiding judge in this particular case, and it certainly is appropriate, she has directed that no jurors are to be identified by name on the record, and no jurors are to be identified by having discussions and identified. So if anything were to happen and I needed to discuss with someone, I would indicate to the videographer that we need to go, at least for the videographer, to go off the record, even though the court reporter would remain on the record. I don't anticipate that will happen, but potentially it will. Having said all that, we will take those breaks as appropriate, but as I mentioned yesterday, if we have finished up with somebody, say at 10 minutes to the hour or so, and I think it's appropriate that we take the break at that time, we'll do that. And for you as jurors, if some emergency comes up or some reason that you need to take a quick break, just raise your hand, let me know, and we can take a break at that time. We'll go off the record. Again, if any of you have any issues, back problems or anything, and you need to stand at various times and stretch your back, that's totally appropriate. Go ahead and feel free to do that. All right. as I mentioned, that witness list, and I thought I'd just tell the jury how we're going to proceed today. And for the record, I'm going to initially call some of the first responders, and I mentioned the names.
Yeah, so the Hart family case is from 2018. I think it was like in March or something, where Ciera and Jennifer Hart, they basically had a scheme where there was a lot of errors made by CPS and everything like that. Yet again, but the Hart family adopted all their kids from, I think, Texas, because Texas pays parents that are adopting children money monthly. So they got all this money all month, and they even had their own jobs, and they ate like absolute pigs. I mean, these two people just had a refrigerator filled with all kinds of food, never missed a meal and then some. And the rest of the kids, all 6 kids, were starving to death. All skinny, way below the weight that they should be at. Just disgusting people. But outwardly, they were like, look how new age our family is. We adopted 6 minorities, and we're so cool. We are so great. And they just did it for a show. But then when it all came collapsing down, because Devonte Hart would sneak over to the neighbor's house and ask for food, he'd go, hey, can you give us some food? And can you give me enough for 6 people? I mean, what a hero that kid is, right? Then right after that, the family that was there said, hey, and they called CPS. They came out and left a note on the door, and then Ciera told Jennifer, and then I think that night, Jennifer and Michelle loaded up all the, Jennifer and Ciera loaded up all the kids and drove down to California and killed them all because they didn't want to face the music. Those 6 kids would have told the truth once they were, asked questions. I mean, isn't that just disgusting? These 2 pigs wouldn't, just to save their reputation, killed all 6 of their children. How about you take your own life, you fool? I mean, my God. You're the ones that tortured these kids. Hey, thanks, Kubi. Yep, happy Saturday. I mean, it was, if you go back and watch all the videos, there's all these little events they would go to and sing and try to pretend that they were just so new agey and just so, just disgusting. Disgusting people. And I'm referring to Ciera and Jennifer.
Covington and Sanchez, and then we will call Deputy R. Julian from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, kind of to set the stage of this incident for you as jurors to see what went on. Eventually, then we'll...
Oh, and my own personal belief is this. If you're somebody that's fostering a child, the state should pay you because you're a caretaker for a period of time. If you adopt a child, there should be 0 funding from any state or any government at all to give to a family that's adopting a child. And I say that because you should be able to do it yourself. Because if you can't do it yourself, you'll get situations like this where the child is really just an income source. There's no way in hell. I get the reasoning. I think there should just be either more foster parents because maybe it's needed. But if you're adopting, you don't get a nickel from anybody. It's your child now. You need to be able to be financially secure. And by the way, why would a state let somebody adopt a child who can't support it? It just seems really weird. You're opening the door for people to adopt, just like the Hart family did, 6 kids, getting all kinds of money every year until they're 18. I mean, God, it's one of the sickest things I've ever heard. It's not even, I think it's worse than the Turpins and shit. And the reason is because this was purely a money-making scheme for them. The Turpins are just psycho, crazy, I don't even know what you want to call it. I mean, I don't know if it's worse, It's hard to say if it's worse, but it just has a different thought process behind it, I guess.
the search and rescue person, Mr. Cheney, and give you a sense of the comprehensiveness of the search that went on for some significant period of time in this particular matter. And I say search, meaning for items that were swept out to sea or came up on the beach, as well as decedents' bodies or parts of them. So, and then we will move on. I'm not sure how it's going to work because we have some scheduling issues, but we will call Dr. Pizarro, who will testify from a medical standpoint as to autopsies. We'll call Deputy Beck from Washington State, who will talk about issues that relate to what happened in Washington State with the Hart family. And I want to say, for the record, I'll be calling it the Hart family rather than each individual, except when we're talking about each individual, perhaps during the time that I'm mentioning with Dr. Pizarro. And
Yeah, so I just read, there's an article out there to answer Plato's question. Texas likely paid Devonte Hart's parents $270,000 to care for adopted kids, report says. Jesus. Jennifer Hart monthly adoption subsidies for her children over the past decade. Hart got nearly $1,900 each month, most recently in March, the newspaper reports. Most families who adopt children out of foster care from Texas get monthly payments that range from $400 to $545 per child to help cover care costs until the child turns 18. See how stupid that is? It's so stupid. Jennifer and Sarah adopted all 6 of their children from Texas. Yeah, and they did that because Texas does that idiotic practice, okay? The couple and 3 of their kids, Markis 19, Abigail 14, and Jeremiah 14, were confirmed dead after their family SUV. Yeah, so. See how disgusting this is, everybody? One of the worst. If this case was today, it would have been huge on social media. When I was covering it, for some reason, it was sort of like a few people talked about it. It was really small. But imagine this today, given all the live streamers and everybody. It would just be, would have been massive. Of course, you would have got some crazy, the lunatic fringe like we get in the Idaho 4 murder case. They probably would have said, oh, they took a wrong turn and went off the cliff. Don't you see? I'm not buying it, man. Things just don't add up here. It's a setup by the police.
Then call the mate officer from the Highway Patrol, Officer Roloff, who will talk about a number of interesting scientific things relating to the vehicle speeds and things such as that. We will then call Officer Jay Slates of the California Highway Patrol, who conducted a comprehensive investigation, and he's the witness who will frankly...
And by the way, there was a lot of these portions that there was just no audio, like there was no audio parts. So I just removed all that. So there's 2 hours and 35 minutes here left of the parts that are, you can listen to.
The longest of anyone, and then we will finish up with Lieutenant Barney of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office for a number of issues to kind of close things out. So that's just to give you an understanding of what we're going to do over the course of this matter. I think we mentioned the schedule yesterday. I'm going to try very much. I like to start right at 9 o'clock each morning. I indicated to you we will go in most cases till 5 o'clock. But again, if we've finished up with somebody and it's 4:45 or something like that, I think it makes sense to move into the next day and start. We'll do that. Lunch will be generally from 12 to 1:30. So that's our schedule. I anticipate we will have all the evidence in before you, not later than the first part of Friday morning, perhaps earlier, perhaps a little later. And I'll read the instructions that I have prepared. As I mentioned, we will have the jury instructions. By law, I have to read them out loud, but you will each have a copy of them in your hands when I read them, and then you will have a copy of them, each of you, during deliberations. And those instructions, among other things, are the definitions of the 4 modes or manners of death that we have in the state of California under law. All right, as I mentioned, this is going to be your courtroom for all purposes. The witness will be seated over here. Very important, as I mentioned yesterday, you as the trier of fact and the court reporter need to hear what the witnesses have to say. So if there are any issues and you can't hear, please just raise your hand and let me know so that we can have the witness talk a little louder, or repeat, whatever. What happens oftentimes is because I'm asking the question, the witness will turn towards me, and sometimes the jurors can't. So let's all work together kind of to remind each other and make sure that you as jurors can hear everything that is said here today. All right. In an inquest such as this, as I said, I'm asking all the questions. In many cases, and I'm aware in this case, there are many interested parties, some of them professional. That means attorneys perhaps from the county counsel's office or various agencies. I'm not really aware of that. But I don't want you to think it's unusual if you see someone passing a note to Mr. Biggs, our court attendant, and then he'll pass that note up to me. That is not an invitation for everyone in the audience to hand me notes. That is an invitation for people in professional capacity to hand me notes. And I will review those notes and determine whether, for the purposes of an inquest, they are relevant. And I'll have to say that sometimes I'm asked questions or I get a note that is not particularly relevant, but generally you will not know if it's relevant or whether I read it or not, because it's usually just within the process of the questioning. But I say that because it's not unusual, and I don't want anyone to think it's problematic or unusual. As we saw during jury selection yesterday, occasionally Mr. Biggs will whisper in my ear, "You forgot to say a name," and he did that twice yesterday. That won't happen again because I have that name written right down right here on my sheet. But that's not unusual. All right. Let's talk just a little bit before we get started with the witnesses about your role as jurors. And as we mentioned yesterday, in the state of California, there are only 4 possible modes of death by law in the state of California. And I'm going to read them to you again. One is natural causes, one is accident, one is suicide, and one is at the hands of another other than by accident. You'll be asked at the end of the evidence to determine which of those 4 applies to each one of the decedents, and only one applies. So we'll get into that at some point, and I'll go over it when I instruct you, and we'll talk about the actually verdict forms. But what you will have in this case is 4 verdict forms for each decedent. So you're going to have 32 verdict forms. And those 4 verdict forms, each one will be of the 4 modes. So you will decide independently as jurors which of the 4 modes applies, which one applies to each one of the decedents in this case, and that's going to be part of your task. At the end of the evidence, I'll instruct you on the law, and that will include the definitions of those modes. Let me caution you, however, at this point. You will not be asked, nor is it relevant for this type of hearing, to determine either civil or criminal responsibility on the part of anyone, not the decedents, not anyone. So that will be your role. And as I've indicated, a coroner's inquest is designed to put out into the open the circumstance of a death or deaths. And so the evidence that I will be calling and bringing will give you an overview of not just the incident itself, but the background and all, which will allow you as jurors to make a determination as to those modes, perhaps motives, various things that will come into this situation. My final mention to you is going to be related to taking notes. You're certainly allowed to take notes, and I notice some of you are already taking notes. You all have notepads in your hands. I like to always caution people, however, and sometimes people are so anxious to take down their notes and look at their notebooks that sometimes they don't focus on jurors. And the important thing, on witnesses, and the important thing in a matter such as this is to listen to what the jurors have to say. So that doesn't mean you can't take notes. You certainly can take notes and take them. However, at the end of the day, when you are deliberating and you have notes in your hand, your notes are for your own personal help in recalling and remembering, not to be used to remind another juror. So each person has notes, because sometimes what we want is people to use their own recollection. You as human beings have your own experience and in listening to, and so I don't want to say don't take notes, but I do want to say caution everyone in reliance on your own personal notes. That's fine during the course of this particular inquest. All right, what I'm going to do at this point is call our first witness, and I'm going to call Officer Covington of the California Highway. Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. State your name and spell your name for the record, please.
Officer Michael Covington, Michael, and Covington, Covington.
All right, and it's apparent, but I'd like you to state for the record what your...
Okay, I've got the actor that I think you look like. Hold on. This guy. I don't know. I don't even know what his name is, but I found the picture by just typing in. Hold on, let me make it smaller. Hold on a second. This guy's like a. Ah, shit. There we go. Look at this guy. He's like a clone of this dude. I think he even talks similarly. You see that one? That's the guy that I was thinking of. I mean, he even talks similarly. He even has the same freaking nose. You know. You see what I'm saying? That's pretty crazy. I just couldn't I don't know what his name is, though, but that's the guy I pictured as soon as I saw him.
I'm an officer of the California Highway Patrol. I've been an officer for nearly 4 years now.
All right. And could you tell us just a little bit of your background, training, and experience as it relates to being a Highway Patrol officer?
So I attended the academy. I started the academy in December of 2014. That was a 27-week academy. Since then, I have had nearly 4 years of on-the-job experience. I've also attended an intermediate accident investigation course, which is a post-certified course that they conduct at the academy. And then prior to the academy, I had approximately 1 year of college for criminal justice.
All right. Can you tell us on, I guess, March 26th of this past year, 2018, what was your assignment?
On March 26th, I was a patrol officer with my partner, Officer Sanchez. She was with me that day. We were just the only unit on duty for the Mendocino coast area.
All right. And you say your partner, were you a field training officer that particular day?
Yes, sir.
All right. And just explain to the jury what's a field training officer.
So once you graduate the academy, you have 187 hours of field training, which is on-the-job training where you ride with the senior officer so they can watch over you, make sure you are doing everything appropriately.
And you were watching over Officer Sanchez, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So she was in the same patrol car as you?
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. You say you were, your beat area was the Mendocino coast?
Yes, sir.
All right. And, all right, if you wouldn't mind just, and I'm going to kind of get into it now, I do want to say that I think I mentioned yesterday that in a coroner's inquest, I oftentimes ask for a narrative, and a narrative is something meaning that I can just ask the witness to give a little bit of a story rather than the kind of stilted sometimes question and answer, and then what happened, and then what happened. So I'm going to ask Officer Covington to just give us a little narrative of what he initially was dispatched to, what he heard by way of dispatch, which caused him to respond to an incident near Westport on that particular day. So if you wouldn't mind just...
All right, so on March 26th, it was approximately 3:43 in the afternoon. I received a call from our dispatch. The call was a vehicle that was spotted at the base of a cliff up north, up by the San Juan Bridge. At 3:43, me and Officer Sanchez, we were busy with unrelated incident, and we weren't able to respond immediately. We concluded our duties with the unrelated incident at approximately 16:32, and then responded to the vehicle that was over the cliff.
I'm going to stop you there just for a minute and say, some people weren't in the military or don't understand military time. So if you if you wouldn't mind telling the jury what I actually know, but tell the jury what 16:32 is.
So 4:32 in the afternoon was when we concluded the other incident, and we then responded to San Juan Bridge for the vehicle. We arrived at the scene at 5:27 in the afternoon. The scene was a large dirt turnout that was on the west side of Highway 1, and the photographs there.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, officer, if you could stand up and stand on this side so the jury can see, and just you can use a pointer if you like, or just your hand, and indicate to the jury. I think that's the bridge you just mentioned, is that right?
Right, this is the San Juan Bridge here. We arrived and pulled into this turnout here, which at the time was filled with emergency personnel fire trucks mostly. And so upon our arrival, we were told by fire personnel that they had already been down to the vehicle. They had accessed the vehicle by walking in from the north through this way. The vehicle was located down here, as you can see over here. They walked in through the north, which at the time that they walked through was they told me approximately knee-deep water. However, by the time that we got there, you couldn't really access through this way without you would be fully swimming in the surf at that time.
I'm going to stop you just for a minute, and we're going to, that I believe is pre-marked Exhibit 1. All right. So the officer is indicating on Exhibit 1. I know it's a little difficult for the court reporter to take down when we say we went around from here, but I think, so indicating that to the left on the photograph, that's where access was along the beach, and it shows some beach area, but what you've indicated is by the time you arrived, that beach area was covered with water. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Then you can continue.
So the only way that you could safely access the vehicle was to rappel down, and it was roughly somewhere in this general area here. They had a rappel line going down. However, for the CHP, I haven't been trained for rappelling, so I wasn't unable to go down to the vehicle. So the on-scene fire, they told me that there were 2 people that were still trapped inside the vehicle and 3 others that were outside, 2 of which were located near the vehicle within the rocks here, and 1 had washed further down the beach, and she was down here laying in the surf. So we then requested for a helicopter to come because they were having, the fire personnel were having difficulties getting the individuals back up from the base of the cliff. So CHP helicopter H-14 responded to the scene. They arrived at approximately 1800 hours, and then they used the...
And that's 6 o'clock?
Yes, sorry.
All right, no problem.
At 6 o'clock p.m. They utilized the helicopter, and they brought up the 3 individuals that were outside of the vehicle. They attempted to extricate the other 2 individuals from the vehicle. However, it was upside down and in the surf and at the base of the cliff, so they were limited on tools that they could have down there, so they were unable to get the other 2 out of the vehicle. So after the helicopter picked up the other 3, we then had a tow truck respond to the scene. Fort Bragg Towing first responded to the scene with it's a pretty typical size tow truck. I believe it's an F550. It's the typical AAA ones that you would see. They attempted to bring the vehicle up, but the truck wasn't strong enough because it was basically pulling it straight up the cliff. So at that point, we had to request for what we call a big rig tow truck. It's a full-size semi-truck, which was all-in-one towing. They responded from the Ukiah area.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a minute, just so the jury can get a sense. So obviously this took some considerable time, is that correct? Can you give us, the jury, just a little sense of from the time that you arrived to the helicopter arrived and then that truck arrived, and it doesn't have to be precise, but just give a sense.
Right, so the helicopter arrived at approximately 6 p.m. It took them, I don't have the exact times, but roughly 2 hours or so to remove the 3 individuals from the base. And then Fort Bragg Towing tried for some time to remove the vehicle and were unable to. Then the big rig tow arrived at 9:39 p.m. and began lifting the vehicle out. That was done. Firemen had to rappel down to hook up the tow cables to the vehicle, and that took a considerable amount of time as well. I don't have the exact time that we left, but I believe it was somewhere around midnight was when the vehicle was finally pulled up and taken out.
All right, and you indicated before that there were two individuals inside the vehicle when they were attempting to pull the vehicle up. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And once the vehicle was pulled up, did you observe any individual within the truck yourself?
By the time the vehicle was pulled up, there was one individual remaining in the vehicle. The other individual, as the truck was being pulled up, came out of the vehicle, and she was now down in the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
So the vehicle got pulled up with the passenger. The driver was the one that fell out.
Okay.
Which was Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
So
and did you identify
not at
anyone
that time.
yourself, or
not at that time? No.
You heard from somebody else that the driver had been identified as Jennifer.
At a later time, right?
All right, and that's certainly appropriate. You can testify to that. So it's your understanding that the driver of that vehicle had fallen out, but a passenger still remained in the vehicle. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that passenger was identified as whom?
Sarah.
All right. Where was she located when you observed her in the vehicle?
She was in the passenger seat, which was, the roof was pretty much caved in and it was leaned back pretty far. Actually, I'm not sure. It was kind of hard to tell with the damage with the vehicle
Mm-hmm.
on exactly where she was located. It was the passenger seat was kind of smashed down completely, so she was somewhat in the passenger area.
All right. And it may sound like an unusual question, but fair to say that everyone there at the scene, that the people that were recovered by the helicopter and the driver and the passenger were all dead.
Correct.
All right. All right. So you left the scene, you say, approximately midnight?
Approximately, yes.
All right. And just tell us from a patrol officer standpoint, what were you doing during the time besides making observations? Were you cataloging things? What precisely were you doing? Just to let the jury know.
We searched the scene pretty extensively for any indications of why the vehicle may have gotten down there or how the vehicle may have gotten down there. We were unable to locate any kind of what you would typically see as tire tracks. If somebody had lost control while driving on the highway, you would typically see tire tracks going off or something. There was nothing of that to indicate exactly how the vehicle had gotten down there. We were at that time kind of unsure of what exactly had happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that was mostly what we were doing. We were also just kind of obtaining statements from firemen regarding what they saw upon their arrival.
Mm-hmm. All right. And as the FTO officer, were you having your partner, Officer Sanchez, put paper on this and write some of those reports related to interviews of police and fire?
That was the initial plan.
Mm-hmm.
However, CHP Sergeant Morales responded to the scene, and we ended up turning the investigation over to MATE.
Okay, all right.
The multidisciplinary accident investigation team. So they ended up writing the report on it.
All right, and so now you've heard what MATE stands for, multi-agency...
Multidisciplinary accident investigation.
All right, so we'll hear from a MATE officer at some point during the course of the week. All right, and just in looking at Exhibit 1 there that you have identified as the area of the bridge and that large turnout, and then over to the right is Exhibit 2, and can you just describe what that is in relation to Exhibit 1? Just so the jury understands, it's a...
So the rocks, the vehicle's right up here, the rocks are down here. That is roughly this vicinity right here, the heavily rocky area. This vehicle is facing southerly, so it's laying here, kind of facing this direction down the beach. So we were standing roughly right around here looking down at the vehicle.
All right, kind of where that big dark spot is on the on Exhibit 1, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, and got just a couple more questions for you. Can you describe in that big turnout area in Exhibit 1, right as it's close to the cliff, it seems that there's a kind of a darker area all the way around. Is there some kind of a berm or something on that?
There is a slight raised berm on the edges of it, and the dark is the grass there.
All right. If you wouldn't mind just telling how you say slight raised berm, how just give us an estimate.
I would estimate about 18 inches tall, a rounded berm, 1 foot to 18 inches or so.
All right, so 18 inches, 1 foot to 18, that's, say a slight berm, that seems to, that's a significant amount, so if it's 18 inches if a vehicle were just accidentally left in neutral and perhaps rolled, would that berm, or could you tell it seems to be significant enough that somebody would have to accelerate to get over it, is that correct?
I couldn't say for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume so, but I'm not sure on that.
Right, okay. I just want, the important thing is the size of the berm that I want the jury to understand, and perhaps I'm a question for somebody else, but I do appreciate that. Let me ask you, were you present for the recovery of the remains of the driver, Jennifer Hart?
Yes.
Okay, and how was that accomplished?
That was accomplished with the Fort Bragg Fire Department used ropes and winches, and one individual went down and put her into a basket, and then used a winch and pulled her back up.
I see. And you were present for that, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. In terms of the examination, so there were lots of fire and personnel in that that turnout area when you arrived, is that right?
Correct.
So in your examination, looking around and looking for anything that might indicate, as you say, tire marks or anything to lose control, you weren't able to observe anything, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any other evidence that you actually saw at the scene yourself or recovered anything? Credit cards, driver's licenses, anything such as that?
Nothing from the top, no.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was items in the vehicle once it was pulled up, receipts and such that we looked at. I did not collect any of it, though.
All right. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to offer here today, Officer Covington, as to your observations when you responded to the scene?
No, nothing that I could think of right now. Just, I guess that it was I've responded to quite a few collisions on the coast area and vehicles down the cliffs, and it was very unusual to have no evidence of any kind to indicate of why it went down the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely out of the ordinary.
I see. And out of the ordinary because there was nothing that you saw that indicated anything by way of skid marks or anything such as that. Is that what you mean?
Right.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. You may step down. And you can remain, all witnesses can remain in the courtroom during the course of this. I am going to next call Officer Sanchez. Raise your right hand, please. You affirm you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Please be seated. State your name. Spell your name for the record, please.
Annabelle Sanchez Corral. ANABLSANCHEZCORRAL.
And can you tell us your occupation, please?
Yes, I'm an officer with the California Highway Patrol.
And how long have you been with the Highway Patrol?
Over a year.
All right. I'm going to ask you to speak up just a little bit. We have been advised that that particular microphone, I don't want to say doesn't work very well. It doesn't work at all. So it's important that we speak out so that the jury can hear precisely what is being said here today, as well as the live feed. So,
yes.
And people can remind me, and I'll remind the witnesses, and we'll do that kind of as a team effort over the course of this. All right, give the jury some background training experience as it relates to you being a California Highway Patrol officer, and also any post high school education. Let them know that as well.
Yes, so I attended the California Highway Patrol Academy. It was a 27-week course. Graduated January 5th of last year. Prior to the academy, I completed my statistics degree, Bachelor's of Science, with the University of California, Riverside.
All right. And as with Officer Covington, part of your academy training with the Highway Patrol is accident investigation, is that correct?
Yes,
So you went through that basic kind of training?
correct.
All right. And on that particular day, we understand from Officer Covington, you were riding with him. Were you driving the patrol car?
Yes, I was.
Is that how it works when you're in FTO training, you get to drive?
That's correct.
All right. And, all right, so we've heard from Officer Covington that, in fact, you were dispatched, you had some other detail you completed, and then you arrived at the scene. So what I'm going to do is just ask you to, we can, some of it I'm sure is going to be repetitious, but basically from you initially, and the reason I've called you is I saw that you put, as I call it, some pen to paper, and tell us what your initial observations were when you arrived at the scene there
Okay.
at Westport.
Yes, so we arrived at approximately 5:27 at the time. The scene was packed with firemen. There's multiple fire trucks on scene.
Let me stop you there. Just give the jury just give them an understanding. Just give us an approximation. How many vehicles did you see in that turnout area? Emergency vehicles.
I believe it was more than 4.
Okay, all right. And lots of people
Correct.
up there. When you arrived, did you see anyone down in the water near that vehicle?
Very possible. I don't remember
Okay.
whether or not there was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I know there was a lot of people trying to communicate with each other, with us.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
What did you understand your initial assignment was? And I understand from Officer Covington that eventually the mate people came in, or somebody from Mate, and took over.
Correct. My understanding was that I was going to complete the investigation for the accident.
And then after some period of time,
Right.
It
It
was
was
determined.
delegated to the mate department.
all right.
Mhm.
All right, so at that,
No, I'm wondering, I wonder if at first they were just going to go down there and try to escape, like get away and sort of hide from what they did. And then one of them took out their vengeance on Devonte and killed him and buried him somewhere else. And then they decided we got to kill ourselves and the whole family because, they turn themselves in, it'll be murder, and they'll have to wonder where Devonte, so they just said we're going to kill ourselves, and we don't want any witnesses, and it'll save face. We'll just make it look like it was an accident. Because the only person, don't you think it's ironic that the only person not one single bit of body part was found of is Devonte, the one who basically led to the CPS investigation? Don't you think that's a little bit interesting?
you made these observations. What did you specifically do yourself?
Yes, well, I tried to relay information from one officer to the other, tried to write down the fire personnel that was on scene that could help us in providing statements according to their observations for our future report, things of that nature.
All right. And so fair to say you stayed there with Officer Covington all the way till
That's correct.
late into the night?
Yes. So we were there until basically all the bodies were recovered. The vehicle was recovered, and I completed the CHP 180 form for storing the vehicle for evidence.
Yeah, and so that's a standard CHP form, a 180 form. Can you tell the jury so that is to take the truck in,
Possession of
the vehicle, to impound it
Correct.
for investigative purposes?
Correct.
All right.
Right.
And so, so it's not just towed to the nearest gas station, it's taken into custody, is that right?
That's right. It was taken into custody, and we note who the owners are, any damage, inventory, whatever is inside the vehicle as well.
All right. And is that part of the 180 form? You put down the information. So did you gather information as to the registered owners of that vehicle?
Yes.
And do you recall who that vehicle was registered to? This isn't a test here today. I wonder if you happen to know. We certainly have lots of information from others, but I thought perhaps if you filled out the 180 form.
I did. Obviously, it was a long time ago.
Yeah, that's all right.
I believe it was to the party involved.
I see. All right. And then whatever other information about the vehicle, and you put it on that 180
Correct.
form, and the vehicle is then impounded. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was the vehicle taken from the scene while you were present at the scene?
Yes, it was taken to all-in-one towing yard, to
I
their
see.
yard.
All right. And with respect to the tasks of interviewing firefighters and identifying them, you accomplished that, and then at some point passed the job over to
Yes.
a mate investigator? Is that
Yes.
correct? All right. And with respect to when you arrived, somewhere around the neighborhood of, what was it, 5:30, something like that.
Yes, 527.
In March, was it light out at that time, do you recall?
When we arrived, yes, but it was still daylight.
But getting darker, so over the
Correct.
course of the evening getting darker and darker?
Yes, yeah. At the time, I remember it was an urgency to get the helicopter on scene so that we could recover the deceased bodies.
Uh-huh. And were there emergency lights that were put up by the fire department or anyone so that the scene could
Yes,
be
there was.
illuminated? All
Once
right.
once
All
it
right.
became more dark.
All right. And as I'm, so that the jury knows, and the reason why some of these questions are just to kind of give you a picture, as I say, of precisely what was going on in these recovery efforts, at least initially right there at the scene. All right, officer. Anything else that you'd like to add that you can think of that you were involved with, other than what Officer Covington has already mentioned with respect?
Hey, and also if any of you guys would like to help support the Gray Hughes Investigates channel during these, we do day shows too. Normally, well, I used to do them on the weekends, but last weekend I didn't do them. But this one, I thought I'd sneak in and then start something new on Monday. But if you'd like to help support the channel, allows me to keep doing these. And then at the end of the month, like I say all the time, which is what we do, is I donate over 50% of the net revenue after I pay taxes, right? Like I pay just taxes, and then over 50% of what's left over. And that allows me to make an income on here, and then it also allows us to absolutely kick ass out there on the charity. I think we were up to like 167,000 or something like that at this point. So we're doing good stuff here. We're one of the few channels that actually makes a difference. All right. Back to the regularly scheduled program.
His duties.
No, sir.
All right, thank you. You may step down. You can
Thank you.
remain if you like. Yeah, I think that makes it's appropriate. And this is precisely where we talked. So we're 10 minutes to the hour. We're going to be calling Deputy Julian from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, but it only makes sense to take our break. It's precisely by this clock, and that's the clock we'll use, 10 minutes to the hour. Please be in your seats in the jury box at 5 minutes after the hour, and we're going to begin precisely at 5 after the hour, and we are off the record. Call up Deputy R. Julian of the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. A couple of things. I just want to, we're on the record in the matter, the Hart inquest. I want to clarify a couple of things. So as to jurors, that admonition that I read yesterday, and I know it was yesterday, but the admonition is you are not to discuss the case with anyone or even among yourselves until the matter is submitted to you. So I know it's always of interest. Gosh, look what happened. What do you think of that guy? Just don't do that, please. And you can talk about it when you're all together during deliberations, because that's what deliberations are. But we're not there yet. So nobody's in trouble, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands. Number two, with respect to contact anyone from the audience, that's called the bar in this justice court, and so we should not have anyone passing that bar without permission of the bailiff or anyone such as that. And if anyone needs to make contact with me or thinks it's important, who's not in some profession, they should contact either the bailiff, Sergeant Schnitzes, or Mr. Biggs here, and indicate that, and he'll probably solve whatever issues you have. So I just want to let that. The final issue is, I know we have a number of exhibits that people are very interested in. They're a little bit far away from the jury. We have what we call oftentimes is publishing something to the jury. And publishing to the jury means oftentimes we'll hand photographs to the jury. What I'm going to do right at this time is have Mr. Biggs, I'm going to call it publish exhibit number 1 to you. I'm going to have him just walk slowly in front of you as jurors so that those of you a little far away can actually look a little closer at it. And I will also say that we're marking these and we're going to introduce them into evidence. And so during the time of your deliberation, you're going to have all of these in the jury room so that you can look at them. So for the record, he is showing exhibit number 1, publishing exhibit number 1 to the jury. And publishing also is not a time for people to make comments or ask questions. It's simply that Mr. Biggs is going to show that to you. And it wouldn't offend me if he made a kind of a slow turn and came up here so that people in the audience perhaps can take a very quick look. And I'm going to say for the record that exhibit number 1 is now officially in evidence. All right, let's show then exhibit number 2, and I would like, it's my understanding exhibit 2 does have a picture of the vehicle that's down the cliff. Is that correct? Yeah, all right, then that's the reason we'll show that, and we'll publish that as well. We'll say why, while Mr. Biggs is showing that I have allowed certain professionals who have to be in communication for obvious reasons to have their phones, such as that, on silent, because some communication is critically important. So somebody's not violating my order. I just want to say that's certainly appropriate. All right, I'm going to call Deputy R. Julian from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Please come forward. Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. State your name. Spell your name for the record, please.
Robert Julian, R-O-B-E-R-T-J-U-L-I-A-N.
Can you tell us your occupation, please?
Deputy Sheriff for the County of Mendocino.
And if you wouldn't mind, just do kind of as I asked the Highway Patrol officers. Give us a little bit of your background, training, and experience, specifically as it relates to being a deputy sheriff training.
All right.
And if you have any education that's relevant after high school, let us know.
Sure. So I attended a post-certified law enforcement academy. I was hired with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office in 2015, and I attended a 16-week field training program. Passed that, and since that time I've conducted over 60 death investigations and received various training from more senior deputies and more experienced deputies.
All right. What was your specific assignment on July 26th of this last year, 2018?
Respond up to a fatal traffic collision and perform coroner duties.
All right. And so as part of your duties as a deputy with Mendocino, you do not only investigations and various patrol, but you also do coroner's duties. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Tell the jury what that involves.
You're arriving at the scene of deaths, whether they're homicides, suicides, and basically determining what they are and the appropriate resources for it. So if it's, a suspicious homicide, we call it our detectives. If it's a suicide, sometimes we call it detectives. Otherwise, if it's a natural death, we usually call the mortuary and have them come and take the deceased.
And this was March 26th of 2018?
Yes.
All right. Well, tell us then, let's get to that particular date, and you were dispatched to this incident, is that correct?
Yes.
Approximately what time were you dispatched?
I believe it was about 4:30.
All right.
Yeah.
And it came through, is there a central dispatch that has highway patrol? And you
It was
were-
actually my day off, so I heard my coworker going to it, and I called in and volunteered to go to it.
All right. So, and what did you hear that caused you to call in and go to the scene?
All of my partners, the day shift and night shift, were responding to a shooting in Gualala, so no one was available to take this. So it was my day off and didn't have anything going on.
All right. And so your response was because there was a report of a vehicle that was in the water at somewhere near Westport, is that right?
Yes.
All right. Well, tell us a little more specifically about what you heard. What was the dispatch that you responded to?
It first initially came out as a 2-person fatal collision, and then while I was responding to it, it came out as a 5-person fatal traffic collision.
All right. And so you responded to that. Approximately what time did you arrive at the scene?
15 minutes after CHP, I believe it was about 5:42.
All right. So when you arrived at the scene, just give the jury a general sense of what you observed, what you did.
CHP was there, Westport Fire, and the air helicopter had just gotten there. So there was probably around 8 to 10 emergency vehicles, a bunch of firefighters running around. I got in contact with the Westport fire chief, and he basically told me that there were 2 people in the vehicle deceased, and then 3 additional people on the shore, 1 further away like Officer Covington explained. And death was obvious for all of them. They were all cold, rigor mortis. There was also water in the vehicle tire well that was warm, so that kind of indicated that the vehicle had been there for a little bit.
Yeah, let me stop you there. Let's talk about that just a little bit. So, water in the wheel indicating that perhaps the tide had come in and the vehicle had been there for over a tide period.
Right.
Something such
Enough
as
to let the water warm, and I mean, the water out here is pretty cold, so for it to get warm for someone to notice that.
I see. All right, and with respect to your indications as in your role as doing some coroner investigations as well, you indicated you looked at some of the bodies or observed and determined that they had been dead for some period of time. Is that right?
Yes.
All right. All right. Now, with respect to all of these, I'm looking at Westport, Fort Bragg Fire, Cal Fire, a whole bunch of emergency responders were,
Right.
and they were there at the scene when you arrived.
Yes.
All right.
And of course, more arrived over time, but
Gotcha.
initially.
Gotcha. Well, tell the jury precisely what you did then. What was your role when you first arrived?
So I first grabbed 3 of the body bags that we placed the decedents in, and those were provided to Fort Bragg and Westport firefighters, which they took down to the shore, and then they placed the decedents in the bags, and the CHP air helicopter brought the first 3 up onto the landing there, or the turnout, where I looked at all of them, determined that death was obvious, and attempted to identify them. Unfortunately, there wasn't any identifying information on them. So they were all placed in body bags and labeled as Jane and John Does.
All right. And when you examined them, could you determine whether or not those 3 in those body bags were adults, children, or kids?
Children, all children.
They were all children? All right. And, all right. Then, and were you present then at the time that the vehicle, the subject vehicle that's depicted in Exhibit 2 there was pulled up from below the cliff?
Yes.
All right. And, all right, can you just tell us your observations, and then you examined 2 individuals that had been in that vehicle? My understanding is one of them...
So I had moved, by the time they started bringing that up, it was really dark. It was, like Officer Covington had said, about 10 o'clock at night. So I moved to a turnout further south, and I turned on all my spotlights on the patrol vehicle to give all the personnel down on the shore some more light for hooking the vehicle up. And I stayed there, and I just kind of watched what was happening with the recovery. And with the cliff, basically, the vehicle got brought straight up and flipped onto its roof. So unfortunately, it got more damaged. And then I saw one of the decedents that was in the driver's seat fall from the vehicle, along with a bag that was in the vehicle.
Did you recover that bag?
The next day, Officer Covington found it down in the shore and gave it to me.
All right. And did you examine what was in that bag?
Yes.
And just describe.
Personal identification for Sarah and Jennifer Hart, amongst a cell phone, I think, and flash drives.
All right. And were those ultimately, to whom were those ultimately given?
Officer Slates.
With the California
Yes.
Highway Patrol? All right. So he was the lead investigator of this incident, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. All right. So while you were there, can you just describe for the jury, you said you parked your patrol car. So in Exhibit 1, which is the one to your left.
Yeah, so it would have been a turnout further down, about right here.
Is
And I
that
shined
south
off-
or north?
South.
So in looking at the diagram then, we're looking at...
We're looking at north, south, east, west.
Okay. And so to the right, the witness is indicating to the right off that road. And that's Highway 1, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So you parked farther down to assist
There's
with
a
illumination.
turnout. I think this is the road that starts it right here, and it came here and shined all of my patrol vehicles' lights here to illuminate the shore.
All right. And that assisted in the recovery of
Right.
the body, whom you later identified as whom?
That was Jennifer Hart.
All right. All right. And then when the vehicle was brought up, then you went in your role and examined a person that was in the vehicle.
Yeah.
And describe, did you identify that person?
Yes.
And who was that person?
That was Sarah Hart.
Okay, so
So she was identified from I believe it was Minnesota or Oregon interim driver's license in the glove box. Or no, sorry. Sarah Hart was identified from a Minnesota driver's license that was found in a tide pool by the vehicle and given to me by Officer Covington. And then I found an interim driver's license in the glove box that belonged to Jennifer Hart.
all right. They have photographs that you could look in.
Yes.
And so in looking at the photographs from those licenses, you could readily identify who the two individual adults were, is that right?
Correct. I was able to identify Sarah Hart. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to identify Jennifer Hart due to her fall.
I see. So some initial injuries when she fell back onto the rocks, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. Ultimately, though, at some point you did identify that the driver was Jennifer Hart, is that correct?
I believe that was done through follow-up investigation through the coroner's department.
But you understood that that happened since,
Yeah.
as I say, hearsay is involved. We will have somebody talk about the identification of that, but that's certainly something you can identify because, you can testify to because you were aware that that was done.
Right. The vehicle was registered to Sarah and Jennifer Hart, and there was plenty of indicia in there to, suspect that it was their vehicle and that was them in the car.
I see. All right. So I'm looking at that, and you provided 3 body bags for the children. Is that, you normally carry body bags in your vehicle?
Yes.
Part of your role, and you had 3 of them?
I had 5. I had stopped off at the office and picked up an additional 2.
All right. Okay. All right. At some point, I think it was described as a backpack. Is that the bag that fell out?
Yes.
And did you observe that bag fall out when
Yes.
the vehicle was coming up? All right. And that was recovered? And
I
then-
suspect that was a backpack that was recovered the following day.
Yeah. And you got that from Officer Covington?
Yes.
Okay. And examined the contents of that, and as you said, there were some indicia which indicated that the identification of at least one of the individuals.
Both. There were credit cards for Jennifer and Sarah Hart.
Okay. All right. And so I'm looking at later times because there are a number of reports, and I'm not going to have you go over all of them, but I'm looking at your various reports. This matter went on for some period of time that you were involved in. Gathering information and identifying various people and that kind of thing. At some point, did you have some contact with some individuals who had found some additional remains?
Yes.
All right. Describe that for the jury.
It was approximately 2 weeks later, and we got a report of found human remains on a beach just north of the Juan Creek.
So that's exhibit, if you'd look at it and identify, is that exhibit 3, does it say on that?
Yes.
All right.
Exhibit 3. So the Juan Creek is right here in about, I'd say, quarter to half a mile north. There's a shallow little beach here, and this is where the human remains were discovered.
Okay. And just for the jury, can you identify where the vehicle was initially on that particular
right here.
I see. All right.
So this is the Juan Creek. That's where the vehicle, the turnout, and that's the bridge, and this is the shoreline.
And ultimately, you responded to the scene
Yes.
to recover that body.
Yes.
And who was that ultimately identified as?
I believe it was Cecilia Hart.
All right. And
Sarah?
that was,
Was it Ciera? Okay.
that's her name. So it's, is it Ciera?
Yes.
All right. So Ciera Hart was, and that body was was whole. Is that correct? In other words, it was.
Yes.
All right.
But I was unable to, well, I'd say whole, but it was devoid of any organic material on the face. So,
All right. And so you recovered that particular body, brought it back to the coroner's office. Is that right?
the mortuary brought it back to the mortuary.
All right. And at some point, then that person was identified. Those remains were identified as Ciera Hart.
Yes.
Is that right? So to that point, there had been recoveries then of
6 individuals.
6 individuals. And there was some understanding, is it not, that there were 8 individuals in the vehicle?
Correct.
All right. Did you participate in the recovery of any other remains?
No.
Can you tell us then, just give us a little bit of the background of your continuing investigation? So you were out there at the scene, you remained on the scene while the vehicle was recovered and the various bodies that were at the scene. Later you participated, it was 3 weeks later, or 2 weeks later, in the recovery of Ciera's remains. Other than your other duties, what related to this incident did you do in the interim by way of investigation?
I went up there quite a bit and gave it some extra patrol and continued to look for additional bodies.
All right. And if you wouldn't mind just getting up and describing on Exhibit 2 any points of interest, anything areas that you patrolled for searching for the remaining individuals.
Come out in the turnouts, park, get some binoculars or a telescope, and check out the shoreline here, because this is primarily, you can't get up here unless you walk from a private property. And I accessed the beach down here at the Juan Creek, going through the Fetzer property, and walked along the shoreline.
Find any debris over a period of time? My understanding is a number of things were recovered, not bodies, but different.
Deputy Martin, he relayed to me at a later time, I believe it was about a month later, that he had found a shoe with a foot. Well, actually, he had not found it, but it was reported to him. And it was a shoe attached to a pair of jeans with a human foot in it.
All right. And that then subsequently was identified as one of the individuals who had occupied that particular vehicle,
Yes.
correct? All right. All right. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to your testimony here today by way of this initial investigation and what your role was in this particular incident, the Hart incident?
Nope.
All right. Thank you. You may step down.
Thank you.
Thanks. We're next going to call Jay Cheney, the search and rescue from the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. Yeah, let's take a minute. Want to just publish that. I'm going to take a moment and swap a couple of exhibits. I'll swear you. Do you affirm? Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name, spell your name for the record.
My name is Jared Cheney, Jared Chaney.
All right, and we're going to take a moment now and swap a couple of exhibits, and then I'm actually going to ask Mr. Biggs to publish Exhibit 3 to the jury just while we're in this. All right. Now, thank you. Can you tell us your occupation, please?
Yes, so I am employed by the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office as a program specialist too. Obviously a self-describing title. One of my many roles is to run the crew of volunteers for the Mendocino County Sheriff's Search and Rescue.
All right. And please tell the jury a little bit of your background, training, and experience as it relates to your duties with the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, and then more specifically, your duties in search and rescue.
So I have been with Search and Rescue since 2011. I've been on many hundreds of missions. I took over as the commander of that team back in 2017. I've been running many large-scale searches, well over 100 searches that involve close to 100 different searchers. So a lot of experience with looking for something that is lost, no matter what that is. My educational experience is actually a Bachelor of Arts and a lot of years in healthcare administration. How that doesn't tie in.
All right, and thank you very much. I do want to say for the record that Exhibit 3 is now officially in evidence. It's been published to the jury. All right. We were talking about the Hart incident, and what I'd like to do is have you, in your role as the search and rescue person for the Mendocino, or one of them for this Mendocino County Sheriff's Office, describe your initial assignment, what you did, and then we'll go through. I know there's a timeline and all, and I'd like you, so we're going to spend a little time with Mr. Cheney and going through what actually happened in this comprehensive search. So you can start out with when you initially heard about this and what your assignment was.
So we are always dispatched by the Mendocino County Sheriff's Office. So after, as you heard from Deputy Julian, we had a vehicle into the surf. We had an unknown number of missing persons to that point. So our team was tasked. The very next morning, we were called by the Sheriff's Office deputies to say, we need to search this area. It was a weekday, and all of the orange volunteer shirts that you see out there are volunteers. So on a weekday, we were able to get 8 during that first initial hasty search of the area. During that first search, while we were still under the impression that there could be someone in the surf, hopefully alive, that was always our hope, we began searching the area starting about 1.5 miles north of the crash site, clear down to almost 5-6 miles south of the crash site. What we determined on the first day was so much of the shoreline is inaccessible. It is straight cliff with water crashing against the rocks. There's no way to get to that shoreline by foot during typical tides. We were able to search a majority of the accessible shorelines that first day. There on the beaches, through the rocks, and made a plan for future searches in the areas that were tougher to get to.
All right. And in that first, and you used the term hasty search, and I'm assuming what you meant is concerned that there might be people alive and you needed to get out very quickly and see what was happening. Is that correct?
That is correct. Hasty is typically a term. It's not meaning poorly planned or anything like that. It's a term we use in search and rescue for expedient because we need to get there for life-saving efforts. So it is a thorough search done during the original operational periods.
Tell the jury a little bit about what you initially found there at the scene, and I'm assuming that you, in that initial search, you didn't find any bodies to recover or any live people, but you may have found some items, indicia, something such as that.
Absolutely. We found a lot of floating debris, a lot of debris washing up on the shores. We had then contacted the Coast Guard at that stage because they do studies of float analysis. If you drop a buoy into the water and call them 5 days later, they can tell you pretty accurately where that buoy is likely going to be. So we do that same kind of thing with science. If a body were in the water, with the water temperatures as they are, how far would they move in any direction? So all indications from our Coast Guard team said they would be floating toward the south. And so we focused a lot of our efforts there. We did see a lot of floating debris. We staged a lot of spotting scopes, high-powered telescopes on all the bluffs over the areas we could not access to identify floating debris. They were able to read the floor mats off of a matching floor mats floating out in the ocean. It was that level of accuracy we had. So,
all right. And all right, we have a number of exhibits that have been placed up, I think 4, 5, and 6, and if you could explain for the jury what, let's start with Exhibit 4, and it's, I know it's heart search, search efforts by operational period. If you could describe for the jury the meaning of that particular diagram and interpret it for them, please.
I'm going to use my high-powered laser pointer. So this is the hasty search we were talking about. This is the day right after the vehicle was recovered that we had 8 search and rescue members searching the cliffs, searching all of the beaches and accessible areas. As further investigations went on and we had more information available, we were starting to be under the impression from our sheriff's office allies saying there's probably 8 people, so we need to continue looking for other debris and bodies and floating evidence. So we continued that search. But the second day, because we could not get at those areas, we called Alameda County, who has a very advanced UAS team, an unmanned aerial systems team. Some people use the words drones, we do not, but they're these little unmanned aerial vehicles that they can fly over the cliffs to very closely inspect with high resolution video the beaches that were inaccessible. So we brought in 5 aerial teams. One of them is from our own Mendocino County Sheriffs. We have our own on the SAR team, search and rescue team. So we flew all of this area that we could not get to on the first day with these UAVs or UASs. We also once again searched those same beaches, anything accessible. And what we found, because a lot of the same members were there the second day we were out, it's a brand new beach. Every tide period would reset the beach. You'd search at low tide, you'd find something. You'd search at the next high tide, you'd find brand new things that weren't there when you were there on that very beach the day before. So the beach was changing out. The third operational period was more of the same. We actually brought in, we had 11 on that day. This was getting toward, it was a weekend day at that stage, so we were able to bring in slightly larger numbers of volunteers. We again searched those beaches, focusing on the areas we could get to because we timed it at low tide. So we were able to focus on getting into those cliff areas that weren't inaccessible at high tide. Still, no bodies had been recovered through this stage. We were finding lots of debris. We were identifying a lot of things still out in the waves. It had been a storm right before the incident, so the surf was still pretty rough at that time, but it was getting better on toward operational period 4, the 2nd of April. Operational period 4, we decided that one of the best forms of searching, we had found the most stuff, was with these spotting scopes. We really ramped up going out onto all the bluffs. We hiked every single bluff, clear out to the edge, private property or not. We got permission and accessed that. We were along the top of all of these bluffs all day with still searchers going down along the beaches. With no finds and with investigation continuing, we realized there still were 3 bodies to locate at that stage. Yeah, still Ciera Hart's remains hadn't been located yet, so we were still looking for 3 bodies. We knew in Mendocino County when we can bring in 16 searchers for this operational period 4 and not find anything, that we needed to do further research. So we called the Coast Guard again and said, okay, it's been this long. Where could our floating debris be? The news came back that, well, by now that debris could end up clear down at Point Arena. They gave us the high probability zones, and a lot of it was south of the incident site, the Fort Bragg, McCarraker Beach area, that little hook of land, as well as clear down to Point Arena. At that stage, we knew we needed more resources. That's where we called the mutual aid system. We brought in other counties. So along with our CHP allies and the others that were working the incident with us, we had 7 other mutual aid search and rescue teams. Volunteers, their shirts are slightly different color, but they are also taking a day off of their work to come search. So we had 85 volunteer searchers on that day from Lake County, Sonoma County, Marin County, Contra Costa County, Alameda County. We have all those, plus some specialty teams. Most search teams are a type 2 team. That means hiking over really tough terrain, rocky, slippery stuff. But sometimes that's not even enough. So we brought in type 1 teams from Bay Area Mountain Rescue out of San Mateo County. They rappelled down the cliffs to put boots on those beaches we'd never been. Contra Costa County also had a type 1 team. Sorry, I will. Contra Costa County also brought in their type 1 mountain rescue team. Marin also has some type 1 assets. They rappelled down cliffs for us. On this day, operational period 5, with those 85 searchers, we searched everything down in the Manchester Point Arena area, all the way from up by Westport, above Westport, 2 miles north of the crash site, areas you can only access at low tide, clear down to Fort Bragg's Noyo Harbor. So we covered a whole lot of miles that day. Found a whole lot of debris on the beach. Some of it related, some of it not. No bodies. So,
If you wouldn't mind telling the jury the debris related, just describe in general terms what you found and how you determined it was related.
so search and rescue members are not the ones that determine. Say we find a children's backpack. We'll call. We always have deputies or detectives on the team with us, and they'll send out a detective to look at the evidence and say, yeah, that's a maybe, that's a for sure, or that's a no. And so we'll categorize it and deliver it to whoever it belongs, whether it's the trash can or to evidence. So
All right,
always through investigation through the sheriff's office.
I got it. So, but there was some indicia that indicated this ultimately came from that Hart vehicle, is that correct?
There were many pieces of car parts that were a plastic car part that was the same color as the initial interior of the car. So no, I don't think serial numbers were ever matched up, but it was the same color and near the same area. So
I do want to say, in addition to this, and I call it a comprehensive search, as I'm looking at these records and hearing the number of teams and people in other counties that came to assist Mendocino County in this. Did you have an understanding that there were also some civilians who were interested in assisting? That in some cases, I understand from a couple of reports, some friends of the Hart family who actually came, and were you in contact with them?
absolutely, we met up with them a lot. A lot of what we did on the days we were there, if there's someone camping at the beach or in a motorhome up on the cliffs, we would inform them of what we were looking for and ask if they'd seen any debris that was important, and ask them to keep their eye out. There was also intentional searchers out there, family, friends. We interacted with them multiple times. Again, search and rescue is a volunteer organization. These are people taking a day off, so they were out there 7 full days at very strategic times looking across those beaches. But the people that were camping there the whole period, they were there every day. And as I said, the beach changed out every 6 hours. It was a brand new beach.
As I'm looking at that exhibit, and I believe it's Exhibit 4, I'm seeing dates all the way from the day after this event all the way through and including the 10th of May. So this
Correct.
was, give us an understanding of how long this search took place. And frankly, I'm presuming that it's a continuing search actually.
It is. So up through operational period 5, we were searching with evidence of floating debris and where the float patterns suggest there might have been remains or other clues. The next 2 operational periods were very specific to finds. So operational period 6 is the day after Ciera's remains were located on the beach just north of the crash site. All of us were kind of like, well, that's interesting because all the float patterns say it should be going this way. So again, we searched much of that area in a higher level of detail that we could get to, timed it with the tides. Almost a month later, clear out in May, this is when the other remains were located. Hannah's remains, the foot up further up the beach. Now it's worth noting that that same place where there was a foot had been searched by many civilians time and time again. Our search teams had been over that exact same area 5 times, and the beach literally changes out. So these were driven off of finds of remains.
Mm-hmm. And let's get back to it. And Ciera, so Ciera, as Deputy Julian indicated, Ciera's remains, she's the one, fair to say, whose body was intact, but had obviously had been in the water for some period of time. Who actually reported that? Do you recall who reported the find?
That is outside of my knowledge.
I see.
I do not know. We get called by the sheriff, and so once we knew Deputy Julian had responded to that scene, our search and rescue liaisons activated us.
I see. I got you. All right. And the same for the shoe and pants with human remains in the foot, which, so you don't know exactly who reported that?
I don't. I know through hearsay and other conversations that there were some local searchers involved as well as residents up the Hardy Creek area. We don't have any of those maps, but it's basically the creek just north of where Ciera's remains were found and south of where Hannah's foot was found.
All right.
So,
So hearsay is okay. We're going to actually have testimony as to that. But just tell us, just for right now, the jury is interested in what information hearsay did you hear about how Ciera's remains were found?
I believe they were walking and beach combing right there, out for their morning stroll, early light, to get shells or whatever else is beach combed. And that's when they noticed her right there in the surf. I believe they pulled her up out of the surf so that she would stay there on the beach, and then notified the friend of the family, who then called the sheriff's office, is my understanding.
All right. And that friend of the family, is my understanding, is someone who had come and was regularly searching as well as all the other volunteers.
Correct, and interacting professionally with our search and rescue teams.
All right,
so.
thank you. And with respect to the pants, the shoe, my understanding there were some pants and a shoe, and then later discovered that there was
Correct.
actually some remains still in the shoe. Is that correct?
Correct. I believe a civilian canine was playing on the beach and would not leave that shoe and pants alone, so the resident of that area brought it back, knowing that there was a friend of the family interested in clothing items to identify them. At that time, the initial person that found the shoe and pants didn't realize there was a foot in that. That was realized later, but it was because a canine wouldn't leave it alone.
And we will certainly get that testimony in, but hearsay, you can say who ultimately that foot was identified as belonging to whom.
I believe Hannah Hart.
Okay. All right. Let's move on next to, and why don't you let me know, should we move on to exhibit?
Well, we've covered most of all of this already, so I think this is pretty much just the written version. You guys are going to get this for later when you're deliberating, so you can not have to memorize what I said. This is the total search area that we covered. So this may look very familiar as Operational Period 5. That's because Operational Period 5 encompassed everything else. But it's worth noting that these areas were searched time and time again. We didn't just cover it once and move on. It was covered again and again and again. And even then, later remains would show up on a beach that we had been on half a dozen times.
So with respect to the exhibit below, what is that number?
So this, again, this looks like Operational Period 5. It is because that's the day we covered the most terrain, but this is everywhere that search and rescue teams searched in the Westport to Fort Bragg to Point Arena, Manchester area.
And down at the bottom, the little tag, what's the number on that?
That number is 5.
All right, so that is Exhibit 5. And Mr. Cheney has testified as to that. So for the record, we have that in, and then that is something also that you're going to have in the jury room, because I'm going to have it published to you and then introduce it into evidence. And you've indicated, is it number 6, the Hart search?
It is.
All right. So you've testified to those particular events, and if you wouldn't mind, take a look at it just for a moment and ensure that you have testified to, I see. So it has the numbers for each search operation period.
It does.
I see. And that is, yes, go ahead.
These will correlate with this chart here, so you can see on the map where those areas are speaking about. You'll also note on here that we've used multiple different resource types. We talked about helicopters. The CHP helicopter was up during the first and second days searching those areas. The Coast Guard's helicopter was up. I believe it was on Operational Period 3. Don't quote me on that. We also had canines. So search and rescue uses canines. There's primarily 3 types of canines we use in search and rescue. One of them is a trailing canine. If you have my jacket, you could hand it to a trailing dog and they would find me specifically. We didn't have a jacket from any of the missing people, so we used area canines instead. And that is the type of canine that's trained to find any human out there. They just smell human, they run, want to play. So we used area canines for those. Later on in the search, we used a third type, a cadaver dog, or a human remains detection dog, HRD. So all those types of dogs were deployed on this, and you'll see those, especially we had 6 different canines working on Operational Period 5, 1 working on Op Period 2. Other than that, we talked about the different type of search and rescue assets that were used, the advanced Type 1 guys that rappel, and girls, that rappel down the cliffs into these very dangerous areas. We used water. Coast Guard actually brought their little cutter out and was getting as close to the shore as they could, but it was still very choppy when they were there. And I think that kind of covers the assets we used out there. Again, Op Period 5, 85 volunteers from 7 different mutual aid counties. It's really great to see that level of participation.
And as you can understand from Mr. Cheney, the comprehensiveness of this search and the reason why I wanted him to remain here this period of time and let you know the assets and the time that went in. It's very important in an inquest such as this, but particularly when it relates to recoveries over time. So what I'm going to do is ask, I think, a couple more questions. I saw in the reports there was some report, I think by a civilian initially, about a sea lion potentially playing with some human remains. Did you hear of that?
I was at the search on that date, yes.
And can you just testify, just tell the jury what was reported?
So we did have a civilian report that they saw a sea lion in a cove playing with what looked to be human remains. That was on operational period 5 when we had 85 resources there. We obviously redirected a lot of those resources right to the bluffs to watch. Some of those spotting scopes, the ones that were powerful enough to see a mile away and still read words. We never were able to interview the sea lion. And all evidence that we saw, it appeared to be a fish. So best.
Yo ho ho! Hey, thanks, Amber Maiden. Very kind, very kind. Also, thank you up there to CR and everybody else earlier. But anyways, I'm trying to figure out. There's more. There's a day 2 of this, but it's not. Wasn't on. I have to try to figure out how to get it. So we'll do that one tomorrow. Because I think they go into the details about like going into town and buying food and shit like that. All right. So this one has like the medical examiner on it, but I don't know. He's a little bit hard to understand sometimes.
We really had it was about 100 yards offshore. And so with spotting scopes, with probably a dozen trained search and rescue eyes on it, the best we could say was it was a fish. We did attempt to put divers in the water. They were not able to locate the sea lion or the fish. So, but made every effort to find that sea lion and what he had.
All right, and Mr. Cheney, is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony? And that's a question you've heard me ask of everyone. And that's not that I haven't read all these reports. It's simply that sometimes a witness says, well, here's something that I think is important, and I encourage witnesses to provide that if, in fact, there is something that they think is important that perhaps I missed in the questioning. So is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony here today?
Not at this time, no.
All right, and thank you. And I will also say, because we don't exclude witnesses, if at some point a witness thinks of something that they think is important, they can notify the bailiff or Mr. Biggs, and we can get them back on the stand if we need to do that. So I want to thank you very much. You may step down. What we're going to do at this time is publish each one of these, 4, 5, and 6, and we'll have them introduced into evidence. You can step down if you like. I just want to say for the record, we are very much on track. In fact, we are ahead of the schedule that I had anticipated, and I'm anticipating that this afternoon, well, certainly before this afternoon, we're going to start with Dr. Pizarro, and we'll have Deputy Beck from Washington. Both of those witnesses will be completed, I believe, well before the end of the day, and we'll probably be already starting with, I believe our next witness after that will be Officer Roloff, the mate officer, and I anticipate will even complete his testimony today. So for those of you who are concerned about Monday or things such as that, I think we're well on track for how we're doing. I like to mention that it is no less serious coroner's inquest because we're moving a little faster than we had anticipated. So just to let you know. So anyway, Mr. Biggs, if you would, and this is Exhibit 4, I believe. Pizarro. Whoops, what's that first step? Good morning, Doctor.
Morning.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or you affirm that you'll tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. State your name and spell your name for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Dr. Greg, G-R-E-G. Middle initial is B as in boy. Last name is spelled P as in Peter, I, Z as in zebra, A-R-R-O.
Thank you. And Doctor, can you tell us your profession, please?
I am a forensic pathologist who performs autopsies mainly in Mendocino County with occasional coverage in Napa, Sonoma, Marin. Previously, I performed autopsies in San Joaquin County. I was also a former assistant medical examiner for the city and county of San Francisco and did previous work in Kern County and Bakersfield.
All right, and call you doctor because you're a medical doctor. Can you tell the jury a little bit of your background, training, and experience as it relates to, I know you said you were a forensic pathologist, but talk to the jury about your medical school training, experience, and all that as it relates to being a forensic pathologist.
Okay. My medical school was in the University of Santo, and I'll spell that, Tomas, S-A-N-T-O. Second word is T-O-M-A-S, Manila, Philippines. Did a pathology residency at Shadyside, Shady Inside is one word, which is affiliated with the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. Did a first fellowship in soft tissue pathology at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, went into private practice, which also included 6 years working in a skin clinic doing dermatopathology. Decided needed more of a change. Went into forensic pathology at the Tarrant, and I'll spell that T-A-R-R-A-N-T, County Medical Examiner's Office in Fort Worth, Texas. Then went into forensic pathology practice in Kern County, San Francisco, San Joaquin. I did work in a company called Forensic Medical Group, which covered Colusa, Sutter, Yolo counties. Before taking my almost current job at regional pathology and autopsy services, which is based in San Leandro, California, doing mainly Mendocino and with coverage in Napa and Sonoma and Marin counties and San Joaquin. Unfortunately, last week they announced that they're going out of business, and now I'm setting up like a private professional corporation to do mainly Mendocino County and also to cover other forensic pathologists in Napa, Marin, and Sonoma counties.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. If you wouldn't mind, tell the jury about forensic pathology. What that's a science in a specific area of medical practice.
Forensic there's two types. When you do autopsies, there are two types of pathology. If you're employed by a hospital and you do an autopsy, they call you like a surgical general pathologist. You do autopsies in the hospital. Usually you have medical records that you literally know it's a natural cause of death. You just do, if the next of kin wants to know the cause of death, or if there's he dies unexpectedly, you could do that. A forensic pathologist, usually we work in coroner's or medical examiner's office. The morgue is usually can be a funeral home, or some counties here in California, they have dedicated medical examiner's office that in case of unexplained natural death or a homicide or a suicide or automobile accident, any type of accidents, we are the ones that perform the autopsy. Or in some cases, if we know a lot of the history, we can do an external examination and we can determine the cause of death. So there's a difference between a hospital general surgical pathologist and a forensic pathologist.
All right, Doctor, and now I know you've explained, I think, pretty well, but I'm going to actually ask you to define for the jury what is actually an autopsy.
An autopsy is generally you examine the entire body. First thing is when we receive the body, we look at, we describe the body from head to toe. We look for, let's say, areas of injuries, for example, bruises, fractures. We also want to identify the body in some certain way. For example, if there's presence of scars, tattoos that can identify the body, we make we take the height, we take the weight, we get all the descriptions available that we do, and then we get some blood, vitreous humor from the eye, urine. Some we do bile, piece of liver. We do this for toxicology studies. So let's say if there's a drug overdose, you have the specimens available that you can test for the presence of illegal drugs or alcohol or any substances that, or prescription drugs that were there, like that. So after you do get all those specimens, and if I can stand, you make usually for an autopsy, you make a Y incision you start from here, down there, all the way down.
Indicating from the shoulders
to the chest,
middle chest,
all the way down to the, above the pelvis, above the genital area. You open the organs, you see if there's any rib fractures, any abnormalities in the abdomen, anything that will, and you have to document by taking pictures, so that will help you prepare your report. And you could also make a schematic diagram, like you have a silhouette of a person, you make your like you make a rough drawing of what you see in your, like that. So that also helps you in writing up your report. So after you open the body, you can open up the ribs by using like a lopper, like you could use like what you do, pruning shears. You can open up the rib cage so you can expose the heart, lungs, and the neck, and some of the neck organs that you can't see. You take off all the organs out. You weigh them. You section them. If you find anything unusual, you can take. You save some of these specimens for, like we put it in a preservative called formalin, so you preserve the body. So just in case, if you have to come back, if you see, let's say, in unexplained death, if there's the examination did not turn out anything, the toxicology is negative, at least you have the specimens to take histology specimens, so you can look at them through a microscope, and then you can determine more if you have the cause of death. And then we also would cut here and then use a special saw that will open up the skull to expose the brain. You take out the brain, you weigh it, you can also section it and do the same way. So after you do all of that, then you start to formulate your report. You try to determine, we just do the findings. We see what we see in the, if there are, let's say if it's a natural death, if there was blockage of the coronary arteries, or if there was a ruptured myocardial fracture, we make the description, we say the cause of death, and in this case, in Mendocino County, it's up to the coroner to determine the manner of death.
All right, and thank you, Doctor. I'll mention a little bit the mode or manner of death in this particular case is going to be your job. That's what those four modes or manners. The doctor will testify as to cause of death, but that's part of the job that is going to be yours during the course of this. Now, doctor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go individually through each one of these members that you performed an autopsy, and then at the end I'm also going to talk about a couple about court order that in fact a person is deceased. So what I'd like to do is start with Jennifer Hart.
Okay.
And ask you, did you perform an autopsy on the body of Jennifer Hart?
Yes, I did.
And doctor, just a couple preliminary matters. Can you tell us when did you perform that autopsy?
The autopsy for Jennifer Hart was done on March 29th of 2018 at 10:20 in the morning, or 10:20 hours in military time.
All right. And normally what I would ask in an inquest is if you could determine the time of death, and I'm assuming that your answer in this case is going to be no. Is that correct?
No.
And just describe for the jury, I don't want to make any pejorative statements about NCIS or any television shows, but it's often, I want the doctor to explain that often very difficult to determine when a death actually occurred, and if the doctor could just very briefly opine as to that, in particularly in a case such as this.
Okay, the cause of death on her was multiple blunt force injuries due to, it was, I ruled it as multiple blunt force injuries, especially neck and right chest, due to motor vehicle plunge off the cliff with rollover, from what I gathered from the reports. And she had a significant amount of ethanol at 0.102 grams percent in the blood and 0.104% grams percent in the vitreous humor.
All right. I'm going to get into that in a little bit, but what I'd like you to do is just let the jury know why you can't determine a time of death in a situation such as this. Not specifically as to this person, just in general, so that the jury understands.
All right. I did put in a time of death of seconds because the main cause of her death that I ruled it in seconds is called mainly an atlanto-occipital dislocation, which is the shearing force of the crash kind of dislocates the skull and the first cervical vertebra, which is called the atlas. So that's where you get the atlanto-occipital, which is the skull dislocation. Usually in 70%, they're usually fatal, and it's usually due most often to high-speed accidents, especially if you head-on or side collisions or sometimes rollover collisions. You could any force that shears off the skull and the first cervical vertebra that also can, it's kind of called an internal decapitation, because you, in many cases, you sever also the brainstem and the spinal cord.
All right. Now, with respect to Jennifer Hart in your autopsy, and you performed the regular, we call it external examination, is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Any significant findings on your external examination as to Jennifer?
There were a lot of multiple cutaneous traumatic injuries, like lacerations, and then there was abrasions. There were contusions. She, especially on the side of the face, was a lot of deep lacerations. And then surprisingly, they didn't have any other than the rib fractures, but no, like, say, broken bones, broken pelvis. There was none of that.
All right.
Okay.
And then your external examination is where you examined and saw that occipital issue that you spoke about, which ultimately caused her death.
examine that is, yeah, usually if the if it's a very loose, if it's very unstable, yes, it could be palpated in a way, but you confirm that when after you've taken out the neck and the brain during the autopsy.
All right. So you confirmed by doing that, in fact,
Yeah.
the cause of death that you've indicated. And if you wouldn't mind repeating for the jury, so it's in this case, her cause of death was.
Cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries, especially neck and right chest. And then I put in parentheses second because since it's due to that atlanto-occipital dislocation, usually, as I said, 70%, it's usually fatal. So it's almost instant. And then the cause is due to motor vehicle plunge off the cliff with a rollover. And then in parentheses, she was the driver of the vehicle. And then another parenthesis also in seconds. And then other significant conditions is ethanol present. I mean, I will leave that to like the law enforcement with regards to if she was legally
Well, I'll ask you the
intoxicated, yeah.
question. So it's, yes, I appreciate that we will. What I simply want from you is that as part of the vitreous fluid, the blood, the things that you take urine, as part of a normal toxicology study, in fact, the results came back, fair to say, that you've just mentioned that there was ethanol present in her system. Is that right?
That's correct.
And ethanol is scientific term for
Alcohol.
And at the toxicology level that you've indicated, 0.10, is that correct?
0.102 grams percent.
All right. So for those of us who are familiar with what the laws are in the state of California, 0.08, fair to say that 0.10 is beyond the legal limit for someone operating a motor vehicle.
That's correct.
All right. Let me ask, with respect to, now I mentioned, you said due to motor vehicle rollover. So prior to performing an autopsy, then you gather as much information about a particular incident as you can. Is that correct? So that you get some history of what happened to this particular person.
That's correct.
All right. So you had gotten that information prior to performing the autopsy.
That's correct.
And in this case, did you understand that the body of Jennifer had fallen out of a vehicle onto some rocks?
Yes, I did get information that when she was extricated, she fell another further 100 feet. I did get some information on that.
All right. And that is fair to say that some of the injuries that you noted on her exterior could very well have come from falling.
Yes.
But very difficult for you as a pathologist to determine which was from the rocks and which was...
It would be very difficult to determine which came from the accident itself or from the time that she was, at the time she was extricated and fell.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. A question that I do have for you with respect to the body of Jennifer Hart is, you have a history of, as a pathologist, I'm assuming multiple investigations and autopsies involving people that were in motor vehicle collisions. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And can you often see injuries related to seat belts on those individuals that you've autopsied in the past?
You will find, like, in seatbelt injuries, like an abrasion that would go like this, crossing over.
So you're going
something like here, or if it's a passenger from this side here.
So the doctor is indicating from a driver, it would be from the left side.
From the left shoulder to the left hip. Sometimes
a lap?
you may have a lap belt injury here, if like that around the hip area. You will have it.
All right. And then you were saying from a passenger you might have it.
You have it from the right shoulder down to the left hip.
I see. So my question to you is, and you may or may not be able to answer it in this particular case, did you see any evidence of a shoulder lap belt injury on the body of Jennifer Hart?
From my recollection, I didn't see any seatbelt injuries, but I can check.
And while you're checking, is that something that you would normally look for in a body that had been in a motor vehicle collision.
Yeah, you would see, like, if she, you can easily determine if she was belted by looking for that, like a seatbelt impression, yeah. Because that is the only thing that will arrest your progression from the seat to, like, to the dashboard, the windshield, and the steering column. Yeah, the seatbelt will arrest your acceleration or the force that you would move towards that, towards the windshield and the dashboard. Mm-hmm. Because when you, from your physics or from your science, if you follow Newton's third law of motion, when you hit a vehicle like that, the force is coming from the object and it goes towards you. So you have an equal and Newton's third law of motion states that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So the force is going towards you. So the tendency for you is to move forward instead of backward. But if you're in a rear end, of course you're going to go, because the force is going towards you like that, you tend to fly back like that.
I see. So in this particular case, from what you knew prior to doing the autopsy, that would be somebody as part of your protocol, you would look for that kind of injury. But it appears
partly you would look for the injury and also look at all the other injuries, because it's especially there will be some stretching injuries, let's say, because you're kind of thrown forward, and then the skin will stretch on some, especially around the hip area.
All right. And then, if you wouldn't mind, because I've looked through your report, I'm not here to testify, I would like you to review your report and see if, in fact, you noted in any, on Jennifer Hart, any injury that you would put in your report as being a result of a lap belt or a seat belt injury.
One abrasion on the right lateral shoulder. It's mostly contusion. Okay. Oh, I stand corrected. Here's large area of diagonal abrasions covering a surface area measuring 14 by 12 inches from the left breast extending to the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. She was belted. That makes sense here. 14 by 12 from here all the way down. Yeah, that's it here. Large area of diagonal abrasions covering a surface area from the left breast extending to the right lower quadrant of the abdomen.
And doctor, that would indicate is that a conclusive that in your view, or is that's where?
It's likely she was belted, yes.
I see. And you say likely.
Yes, it's very likely.
All right. What, is there anything else you'd like to add then related to Jennifer Hart and her autopsy?
Let me see. Other than she had hemoperitoneum, which is blood in the peritoneal cavity, about 100 milliliters. She had lung lacerations on both right upper, right lower lobes, liver lacerations, so a lot of injuries are from the right side. That's about.
But the ultimate cause of death was
the ultimate cause was the atlanto-occipital dislocation.
I see. All right, doctor. Let's move along to Sarah Hart. I'll ask the same question. Did you, in fact, perform an autopsy on the body of Sarah Hart?
Yes.
And what was the date of that autopsy?
That was also March 29th, because it took me 2 days to get through all 5 cases.
All right. And with respect to that autopsy, can you tell us your significant findings on external exam? And I say significant findings if they're injuries that are significant, that go to perhaps cause of death or...
Okay. Essentially her cause of death is also, it was an atlanto-occipital dislocation with traumatic asphyxia, in parenthesis second. And then due to, she was pinned between the seats and the roof. And then due to a motor vehicle rollover over the cliff.
I see. All right. And well, the same question with respect to her. In reviewing your autopsy report, do you have evidence that in fact she was, evidence one way or another, whether she was belted or unbelted?
From all the injuries, it does not appear that she was belted. No.
All right.
So mostly are small, most of the cutaneous injuries are, majority of them are pretty small. So it's from there, it's unlikely that she was belted.
All right.
The largest is a contusion on the anterior right thigh. That's the biggest injury.
External injury.
External injury, yes.
All right. All right. And so you've indicated a very similar major injury as you've testified with respect to Jennifer as to the cause of death at occipital, yeah. I see. And your toxicology studies, I could see that, in fact, you gathered the various fluids and blood for sending off to the toxicology lab, and I see the result. Can you testify as to what the significant toxicology findings were? The
significant toxicology for Sarah was a diphenhydramine, which is known as Benadryl. Her level is 2,100 nanograms per milliliters, which in conversion is 2.1 milligrams per liter.
And can you tell the jury, I suppose in layman's terms, what that means?
Okay. It went through here. Her level of Benadryl is pretty high, like a toxic level from one of my references books is 1 to 5 milligrams per liter, and her level was 2.1. So she means that she had diphenhydramine toxicity, but that is not the reason that killed her. That because you could, in many cases, like with regards to ethanol, with methamphetamine, you could have really sky-high levels of these drugs, and you'd still be walking, and you'd still be alive. So this was a diphenhydramine toxicity, but she still may have not, that did not kill her.
What I would like you to do, however, if you can, let the jury know, so this is diphenhydramine, which is Benadryl, in order to get to that level, which you considered a toxic level, not whether it killed her or not, but Benadryl is something, sometimes people sleep, is that not correct?
That's correct.
Say what are some of the symptoms? And if, more importantly, if you can tell the jury approximately how many standard doses of Benadryl would it get for somebody to reach that level that you've spoken of?
I can't say how much Benadryl to produce, like you'd have to take a significant amount of Benadryl to have an overdose.
Well, the term is this, would you consider this an overdose? And I understand you've already said it certainly wouldn't have killed her, but
it's in essence, it is an overdose, but it's not to the point that it, like a lethal dose would be from, as for a lethal dose is from 5 to 39 milligrams per liter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's the lethal dose for thing of Benadryl, and because Benadryl comes in, if I remember, 25 milligrams per capsule.
I guess to kind of help the jury, and I think where this is something is of interest, particularly in this case, is that I appreciate it's not a lethal dose.
Right.
But I do appreciate it appears that it's well beyond the recommended therapeutic dose. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's fair to say. All right. Fair to say that Benadryl, I have some familiarity. I'm not an expert in this case, but most history that I'm understanding, having children, all that, if you give somebody one Benadryl, it helps them sleep at night. And that's one dose of Benadryl. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. And coming back to, I think if I remember, it comes in a 25 milligram and a 50 milligram capsules like that, and then they come in creams. Mm-hmm. It can be I believe it can be injected. But your over-the-counter is 25 and 50 milligrams of capsules of Benadryl, if I recall.
So however it was ingested, whether it was dissolved or pills or however, in Sarah Hart there was, fair to say, well beyond the therapeutic dose of Benadryl in her system at the time of autopsy.
That's correct.
All right. And it has a depressive effect, is that correct?
Yes, it does. Mm-hmm.
All right.
You can have, like, for adverse effects is dry mouth, sedation, pupil dilation, increased heart rate. There's also urinary retention. Overdose, you have like, you can have hallucinations, heart palpitations, drowsiness, seizure disorders, and tremors. Mm-hmm. And lethal doses, you die from cardiovascular collapse.
I see. Well, I'll ask one final question. I think it's fair to say that Benadryl is a drug that is often, when taken, there's a warning that says do not drive or operate heavy equipment. Is Benadryl?
Yeah, that's correct. Mm-hmm. Any sedative, you don't drive or operate heavy equipment. That's correct.
All right. All right. Thank you, Doctor. You know, we've got several more to do, and I'm going to apologize to you that we're going to take our lunch break now. Okay. Have you back after lunch. I want to let the jury know we're still absolutely on track. As I say, I think we're even a little ahead of time. I anticipate we'll finish up with the doctor early from the time we get back at 1:30, and then we'll move right into I believe Deputy Beck from Washington, and we're right on track, just to let you. Please remember that admonition, that don't talk about the case among yourselves or anyone. I have no idea where somebody might eat and will it, so I can't make any recommendations when we go off the record. I'm sure you can chat with somebody, or many of you probably know. So we are off the record. All right, Exhibit 4 is officially in evidence, and I'll have Mr. Biggs now publish Exhibit 5. Exhibit 5 is in evidence officially. So now I'll have him publish Exhibit 6, which is really just a kind of an outline of what his testimony was, and you rely on his testimony first and foremost rather than this, but this can be very helpful for you if necessary during your deliberations. All right, Exhibit 6 is in evidence, and I think our timing is pretty good. We're going to take a break, give you a couple extra minutes till 11:15. And as I said, we're right on track. Remember the admonition. Talk about the case among yourselves or among anyone, and don't go in and go on any PDF devices or anything like that, and even so much as looking at overheads of the scene. Please don't do that. All right?
Here, and another laceration below the right eyebrow, but they were not big injuries, and there were no injuries to suggest that she was wearing a seatbelt.
Right. Doctor, let me ask you, with respect to the injuries that you've described, and let me go back to the first Jennifer Hart. When you first perform an examination of an individual, in this case specifically Jennifer, was she clothed when you made your initial examination of her?
All of them were clothed. So after you you describe the clothing as the best as you can, and take pictures like when you receive the body, and then you take off the clothes, and then you can photogram without the clothes on. So
I see.
So that's when you can evaluate all the injuries in the body, and as I said in the past, you look for any scars or tattoos that can further identify the body.
Mm-hmm. All right. So with respect to each one of the people that you've testified to so far, were all clothed upon examination, initial examination, and that's part of the external examination, is it not, that you actually look at them in a clothed condition?
Yes.
And then I think as you described it, there were cuts, abrasions, and various things on their bodies, and that would have taken place while they were clothed. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Now, with respect to Abigail Hart, what are your significant findings on your internal examination?
Internal examination was mostly, again, another atlanto-occipital dislocation.
The recovered.
That's correct.
All right. Then what I'm going to, we'll have somebody else testify as to. We are going to take a break, but we're kind of finishing up into here, and I think we'll finish up with the doctor. Mr. Biggs has suggested that this is an appropriate time to take a break, and I'm going to agree with him. What I want to do is have a little bit of an offline review of a couple of reports and see if we're finished. I think we're finished with the doctor, but I just want to make sure before I release him and somebody has a question or something. So let us take our break, and let's get back here promptly at 20 minutes after into your places, and we'll continue. We are now off the record, and remember the admonition. Thanks. Is that Ciera that you had testified to with respect to those injuries?
Yes.
All right. With respect to those injuries, is there any way that you can tell whether or not those closed fractures that you discussed were post-mortem or pre? In other words, before or after death?
It's difficult to determine whether it's pre-mortem, post-mortem, but based on the injuries of the other members of the family, it's likely that the broken femur and the tibias was likely occurred that when she was ejected, and she might have hit into like the rocks in the body of water. That's where the fractures would have likely would have occurred, because if she had fractures and the other members of the family had no fractures of their extremities, it's likely scenario that once she was ejected and hit into rocks or any or into the body of water with rocks underneath, that's likely what the fractures may have occurred.
All right. Thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your testimony here today?
I think that's all I can think of.
All right, Doctor, then thank you very much, and you are excused. Thank you. You may step down. I'm next going to call as a witness Deputy Adam Beck of the Clark County Sheriff's Office of Vancouver, Washington. Yes. Yeah. Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated. State your name. Spell your name for the record, please.
My name is Adam Beck, Adambeck.
I'm going to pause just a moment while they put up a couple of exhibits, and we'll get right into having some discussions. And is it appropriate to call you Deputy Beck?
I am both a deputy and a detective, so whatever you want to do.
Call you Detective Beck then.
Okay.
Can you tell us your occupation, please?
I am a deputy sheriff with the Clark County Sheriff's Office, southwest corner of Washington State, for those of you who we're just across the river from Portland, Oregon. Been a deputy sheriff for about 5 years now. Prior to that, I was a reserve deputy sheriff with the Clark County Sheriff's Office for about 4 years. So I'm volunteering as a reserve deputy sheriff. In the 5 years that I've been a deputy sheriff, I'm now a major crimes detective with the Sheriff's Office. So I'm one of several detectives who worked on this case as part of the Clark County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit.
And if you wouldn't mind telling, we understand how long you've worked for Clark County. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background, training, and experience as it relates to being a deputy or reserve with Clark? And then if there's any post-high school education, let the jury know that as well.
So to become a reserve deputy sheriff, I go through a reserve deputy police academy. And then once you get hired, I went to the full-time state academy, which is about 5 months. State of Washington to get certified as a full-time police officer. Since then, I've had training in homicide investigations, interviewing, crime scene investigation, documentation, stuff like that.
All right. Can you tell us your assignment? And I know, being from a different state, and what initially brought you into the Hart investigation? If you could just let the jury know how that happened.
Yeah, definitely. So I was first contacted on the 28th, so a couple days after the incident. We were contacted by the Sheriff's Office down here in the California Highway Patrol. They had located the vehicle and some occupants in the vehicle, and their kind of preliminary investigation indicated that there might be some children who were missing. And so they asked us for assistance to try and find some evidence around the home where the family lived in our jurisdiction. To see if we could try and locate if the children were there or any indication where they might have been, or maybe possibly some explanation as to what happened or why it happened.
All right. And Detective Beck, were you then specifically assigned to this case and to accomplish a number of the tasks that Mendocino County requested of you and the Highway Patrol?
Yes, I was. So I was the lead detective, but we had several detectives I worked with who all did different tasks. So we all wrote reports. I got them all right here, and I've read them all, so I can kind of testify about what our team did.
And again, I've seen you back in the past, in the back, and as the jurors all know, we do allow hearsay. So instead of bringing down 25 detectives from Clark County, Washington, we're going to rely on Detective Beck to tell us about the investigation and the significant findings, even of those of some of your fellow deputies and detectives up there. Detective Beck has been kind enough to prepare what's called a final summary of the Hart investigation, and I think it appropriate that we put it up there. We'll have it introduced into evidence, but I'm going to ask him questions about it, and it provides a very nice script for me to ask questions as appropriate for you to hear what Clark County did with respect to this investigation. So I'm just going to start out and have you testify as to that. It's not even a bullet point. It appears to be a year, 2011, and tell us the significance of that year and what you put there, and explain it to the jury, and I'll ask questions as we go.
Definitely. So this timeline is a result of the investigation. So as we started the investigation, some of the information in this timeline we didn't learn until later. I guess I'll just start off by saying The 2011 date, when we began our investigation, there had been some complaints to Child Protective Services. And when they received the complaints, they did some investigating amongst Child Protective Services and learned there was some issues against the family in 2011 in Minnesota. Officer Slates with the California Highway Patrol probably can testify in a little more detail about specifically what those complaints were and what happened.
I'll get into that with him. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For purposes of us, what you knew in Clark County and what you did.
Yep. So just basically, there were some complaints about the family withholding food with some of the kids and some physical abuse of the kids. One of the mother, Sarah Hart, ended up being arrested and convicted of assaulting one of the children.
All right, and then just continue down so that your next point is 2013.
So in 2013, the state of Oregon had opened up a CPS investigation into the family. Similar accusations of withholding food from the children from the school. The family was living in West Lynn, which is just across the river from where we are at the time. So the State of Oregon CPS did an investigation. They had a doctor evaluate the children. They interviewed the children. They interviewed the parents. They did a pretty extensive report. And at the end of it, they determined that they couldn't determine that there was any abuse taking place, and it was closed in 2013.
But there was, and I'm reading from your outline, I was going to ask you that the there was an evaluation of the kids, and they were below average in what fashion?
I'd have to, Officer Slates probably could talk in more detail about their determination. I got a copy of one of their reports, so I didn't. I don't have the full thing, but the doctor who did the evaluation made comments about not knowing the child's history, and that although they were smaller than normal, it was still within some acceptable range.
All right. Well, then we'll get that out of. You prepared this night's outline, and that's what I'm kind of going on. So, certainly appropriate for you to indicate to me that there's a better witness that I'm going to be calling that might have some additional information. That's appropriate. So I am still going to rely on it a bit as we go. So the next entry then is 2017. And can you tell us what significance that is in your outline and your reports?
So investigating this case, began to do research on the family and the property there in Woodland, Washington, which is in our jurisdiction of Clark County. And so one of the things we learned is that the family purchased a house in May of 2017, so about a year prior to all this. Later, when we interviewed a neighbor who shares a driveway with the family, you can see their driveway off the map behind me, commented that although the family moved in about a year before, they didn't see many kids outside playing. They were told that a family was moving in. They seemed kind of surprised that they never really saw the family outside or activity. They also reported seeing a white sedan and a gold Yukon SUV coming and going from the property.
What I'm going to do, since you referenced that, I think we've marked that, if you could help me out, Exhibit 7, is that 7 or 8 for the record?
This one's 7. I don't know if that's a 6, maybe? Or 15.
Well, I know we
15.
already have a 6, so that's got to be something else.
15.
All right. So since you referenced that, why don't you stand up, and if you could put your back to me so that you can indicate to the jury and the jury can see, just describe what's depicted in that photograph, Exhibit 15.
Yeah, so up here is the main public road, and there's a private gravel driveway off the road leading up. This right here, it's labeled as the Hart home. The driveway splits off, pulls up. There's a garage and the normal residence and a deck off the end of it. The driveway also splits here and goes to a neighbor's house, which is right here. There's a row of shrubbery and trees, so they're not really visible from each other, but they share the driveway, and they're a pretty close vicinity.
All right, just while you're standing there, is there was a block wall somewhere between the two driveways? Is that depicted in that?
Yes, you can kind of see the blocks here. There's it's on a hillside. The house sits up above the driveway. And as it goes down, somebody put in a block wall at some point to kind of level off an area down here. It's those blocks you can get at Home Depot, the concrete blocks, you just stack them. One of the things that we observed when we ended up serving a search warrant on the house was that as the block wall came out to the driveway, the corner of the wall looked like it was knocked over. The blocks were on the ground, and it was kind of the corner near the driveway. So one of the theories was that it would be possible if a car was backing out or something in a hurry, it might have toppled over the blocks as it was exiting the driveway.
All right, and kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but you had interviewed the neighbors, had you not? And what had they said with respect to their observations?
I did. So the neighbors had, I guess I can start back. The neighbors were the ones, these neighbors here were the ones who had initially called CPS. They had some concerns. One of the children had come over to them earlier and asked them for some food, making comments about the parents withholding food from them. And so about a week later, he came back and asked where the food was, and she hadn't purchased the food yet, but thought, okay, this has kind of risen to the level of I need to report this to somebody. So she calls and reports it to CPS. That same day, CPS comes out to contact the Hart family here. And as they're coming up, they get confused as to which house is which, and they actually come to the home belonging to the neighbor. And while they're talking to her, they see a gold Yukon, not knowing it's the car, come pull up to the Hart home. After they're talking with her, she points out that's the car and that's the house over there. They go to contact the family, but nobody answers the door. The CPS worker walks around to the back, knocks on the door, nobody answers. She doesn't see anybody, so she ends up leaving. The neighbors report that the next day they noticed that the car was gone and that the blocks were knocked over. And I asked them, is that something you would have noticed prior? And they said yes. So it's likely that it happened overnight at some point when the gold Yukon disappeared.
And it's important to let the jury know, what was that date that CPS worker in Washington went out to the house and spoke with the neighbors?
So that was on the 23rd of March.
All right.
So the morning of the 24th is when they noticed that the blocks were gone.
All right. You can sit down in your seat if you'd like, and I'll get you popping up. So we're going to get back to your outline a little bit, but I thought it important, just as long as we had that outline there, that the jury could see the Hart house in Washington. All right. So you had mentioned they purchased the house in 2017, and did your investigation lead you to understand that they moved from Oregon to Washington? Yes. And purchased that home?
Yes, that's correct. The home that they were living at in Oregon, in West Lynn, which is where the previous CPS complaint, they left that home and moved to our jurisdiction in Clark.
All right. And then, all right, there's another 2017 on the outline, which is marked Exhibit 7, I believe. Mm-hmm. But if you wouldn't mind, just tell us, as part of your investigation, the significance of those entries.
Yes. So while I was interviewing the neighbor, the same neighbor over here, the summer of 2017, they reported that Hannah had come to their house in the middle of the night and woken them up. Banging on the door. As soon as they opened it up, she came in and said she ran upstairs to the bedroom and started saying, "Don't tell my parents I'm here," something to that effect. Kind of seemed in a panic. They thought this was weird. A few minutes later, they heard the family calling for her, and eventually the family came over, and they said, "Yeah, Hannah's here." Hannah came down, and they had a conversation. And the family apologized, and Hannah went back home. The next morning, the family came back over with all the children and knocked on the neighbor's door again at early in the morning, at 6 a.m. the next morning, to apologize. Again, the neighbors kind of described this just as bizarre. They weren't really sure what to think about it.
And did the neighbors say anything about what either the adults said about the children?
They said they had explanations. They said that they adopted the kids. They come from traumatic families and had some mental health issues, and that they're from prior to being adopted, and that's kind of how they explained the bizarre behavior.
Now, understand, this is a hearsay statement, but that's acceptable. So that is not information that Detective Beck got directly from the Harts. That is something that the neighbors got from the Harts and then recounted it to the various detectives and people of authority in Washington. So I just want to always make it clear to you as jurors where the information came from. All right, let's move along to March 15th of 2018. And again, we're doing it in a little different kind of format, but I have this nice outline that I kind of like to follow that you've prepared. So I'm going to kind of leave it to you. Tell us the significance of that date of March 15th of 2018 and why you put those entries, and then we'll explain them.
So, and I mentioned this earlier, this is the date that the neighbor, one of the children went to the neighbor's house and mentioned asking for food. He mentioned that the parents punished them by withholding food and asked her to purchase several items of food and asked her to leave them outside their house somewhere where he could access. She said that she didn't purchase the items yet, and he returned on Friday the 23rd, which is what I talked about, saying, hey, have you purchased these items yet? And at that point, she got concerned enough, and that's when she reported it to CPS.
All right. Did she, did those neighbors, and they're the same neighbors that talked about the brick wall or the
Yes.
rock wall or whatever, did those neighbors say that they gave any food to, and it was Devonte, the one of
Correct,
the children?
it was Devonte. They mentioned that they didn't see many of the kids outside very often, but every once in a while they would see Devonte out. He would bring the garbage to and from the street or out working in the yard, and they kind of would strike up a conversation with him every once in a while. So they had somewhat of a relationship with him, and they thought maybe that's why he came to them asking for the food.
And all right, so that event, and then we're on to the 23rd of March, and you had just testified in that entry is because that is the date that he came back asking
Correct.
if there had been, if she had purchased the food?
That's right. And so when it kind of rose to the level where they felt the need to report it to CPS, so they called, and that same day CPS came out. That's when the investigator was unable to get anybody to answer the door and left her card in the door.
I just want to know, and can you put the connection between that same vehicle, it's 2003 GMC Yukon, is that the vehicle that was in the driveway at the?
So I can't say for certain, but I do know that they're associated with that vehicle. It had a red kayak tied on the top, which the neighbor said they just drove around with a kayak on the top, which was always unique. CPS worker also saw the red kayak on the top. We found the kayak in the backyard of the house, and the vehicle is similar to the vehicle that they found at the bottom of the cliff that is registered to them.
All right. So we'll clear that up with another witness in this particular case. I thought perhaps Detective Beck could do that for us. All right. Then let's, moving on to March 23rd, and if you can talk about the investigation, your findings as to Sarah Hart's employment and anything of significance that you learned about that.
Yeah, certainly. So Sarah Hart was a manager at a local department store. Her coworkers report that she worked a normal shift that day, and then she leaves work at about 17:26, which is about 5:30 in the evening, and is driving the white sedan, which we found at the house when we did the search warrant.
With respect to Sarah, can you interviewed, or did you interview various ones of her coworkers?
Mm-hmm.
And, all right, and tell us about what you learned about her reputation for being timely and being an employee one way or another.
There was another detective actually that interviewed the coworkers, and she was told by coworkers that she, while at work, they kind of had some indications there might have been some problems at home, arguing with her, with her wife.
Jennifer.
Is that what,
being her
Jennifer,
wife.
yeah,
Yes.
is that what you're?
What I was getting into more, and I'm just looking at all the records, it had appeared that she was a very good employee who's certainly on time at all times, and so if you could...
Definitely. So that was on the 23rd. She leaves work about 5:30. We have video showing her leave work, and so one of our goals was to just kind of see if we could document exactly the last time she was seen alive, and that's what we were able to determine. Later that night, early the next morning, on the 24th at about 3 in the morning, Sarah sends a text to a coworker saying that she's too sick to work that day, which the coworker described as strange. That's not like her to not show up to work, especially at such a last moment. So then later that morning, the neighbors that's when they notice that the Yukon is gone and that the blocks are knocked over. Yeah.
All right, then let's fast forward to, let's see, March 25th of 2018. There's an entry there. Can you tell us the significance of that entry?
Yeah, so later on in the investigation, as we started researching the family, we served a search warrant on the house and found some financial information, and the California Highway Patrol officers actually covered a Safeway rewards card from the vehicle. And we were able, one of the detectives, Detective Mitchin, in our unit was able to contact Safeway, who was able to track that rewards number to find video of a female that we believe to be seen purchasing some food at a Safeway in Fort Bragg, which is just up the road.
And so to be clear, your testimony is that the California Highway Patrol recovered at the scene of the incident in Westport off the cliff a Safeway card.
Correct.
A Safeway rewards card.
Correct.
All right. And then that was turned over to your agency?
A
at least
picture of the number.
identified.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And then based on that, it would track, is that how it does, track if it was used at any Safeways? And in fact, there was some evidence that it was used at a Safeway in Fort Bragg. Is that correct?
That's right.
And on what date
in the
was
morning?
that?
On the 25th.
On the 25th. All right. All right, then moving right along to the 26th. And let me get back. In the outline that you've prepared, it indicates that that individual seen at the Safeway was in fact Jennifer Hart. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. All right. Moving on to the date of the 26th of March of 2018, you have some entries, and if you could tell us the significance of those, and perhaps we'll ask some questions about that.
Yeah, so on the 26th, so this is a couple days later, CPS returns to the Woodland House. They weren't able to get a hold of anybody the first time, and obviously all this is with hindsight. At the time, we didn't know anything about them leaving or anything like that. The neighbors hadn't reported that. So CPS returns the house to try and continue their investigation about the alleged withholding of food. And again, nobody answers the door. They do note that the Yukon that was there the previous visit was no longer there. And they contact the sheriff's office, the Clark County Sheriff's Office, because at this point they're concerned that they're unable to get a hold of family. And a deputy, Clark County Sheriff's Office deputy arrives, and again, nobody's answering the door and nobody appears to be home.
All right, and did the CPS worker indicate that she saw her card still in the door?
Yes, that's right. So she left her card in the door a couple days prior, and she said it was still in the same place as if somebody, and it was in the door crack of the door, so when you open the door, it would fall down. So and it was still there.
All right. I want to get back a little bit, because in reading the reports also, the prior time when she was talking with the neighbors and she saw that SUV pull into the driveway, and you indicated that she had gone over to have a discussion, and she put a card in the door, did she not, at that time?
Yes, yes.
All right. And then went around the back of the house and nobody answered the door?
That's right. That's what she reported.
And at some point she returned to the house and that card was gone, is that correct?
That's right.
All right. And then later she went back again and put a card in the door?
No, I think it was just that second time.
I see. All right. Let's move then to, again, the 26th, and that is, there's an entry and it relates to her coworkers. So can you tell us the significance of that particular entry and how it related to your investigation?
So she returned at 10 o'clock in the morning, the CPS worker did, and that's when they called the sheriff's deputy, who found that nobody was home. And then a little later that same day, one of Sarah's coworkers calls the sheriff's office and reports the unusual that Sarah had called in sick for work prior and she hasn't shown up since, and that they were concerned. And so they requested what's called a welfare check for law enforcement to go and knock on the door again. Again, nobody was home and nobody answered. About that same time is when the crash was discovered down here by the sheriff's office and the highway patrol down here, and started kind of putting the pieces together.
What I'd like you to do, if you can, is tell us what the days of the week are. So if Sarah Hart was seen leaving work on the 23rd, as you say, it got some video from whatever the store was to show her leaving. That was the 23rd?
That's right.
Was that a Friday night?
I believe, I don't have a calendar in front of me.
All right. What I'm just trying to think is what day, so that then we fast forward to the 26th, where she still hasn't shown up at work, and that's when her coworkers contacted the office for a welfare check. And a welfare check, describing to the jury, why don't you describe for them what a welfare check is?
Just if somebody's concerned, you know, if something's unusual, family member or friend hasn't heard of a loved one in a while, or a coworker, and they just request the police officer to go knock on the door and just check and see if everything's all right. We're kind of limited in what we're allowed to do. You know, there's no proof of criminal activity, but we're just kind of go knock on the door, see if we can answer the door if somebody's just sick or doesn't want to talk to somebody or what.
Okay. On the 26th is when it says LE is alerted. What is LE?
Law enforcement.
I see. And law enforcement up in Clark County, Washington, is that correct?
So at about 1300, which is about 1 o'clock, is when the coworker called for the welfare check up in Clark County. And then a little bit later, my report says about 3:30 is when the crash is discovered here in California. But at that point, we're not talking to each other. We're separate. You know, we're hundreds of miles away. So things are kind of happen simultaneously.
Just we've had marked it. It's not blown up, but it is a picture of that that block wall. And as you indicated, we're going to have that. Is that the block? The
Yes,
picture
that
of the
is.
block wall? Did you actually take that picture?
I did take that picture.
All right. So we'll just publish that to the jury, a picture of that. Yeah, you can. There are lots of ways. We call it publishing to the jury, and sometimes it's handing to a jury and they pass it down to each other, or sometimes it's as Mr. Biggs did. We just hold it in front of a jury.
If you look at it, you can kind of see that it's on the edge of the driveway, so you might have just caught the corner as you're backing down the driveway.
Yeah, so as you can see, they investigated this like it was, you know, there was actually people on trial. They got all the details. Tomorrow there'll be more.
And that now will be Exhibit 16, as happens in all matters such as this. Things come in out of order. There's no significance to that. That is now a piece of evidence that you can review during your time deliberating. And I think the detective has testified to the significance, at least the potential significance is it may have shown haste. Is that
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. I mean, it could have been that the blocks just got kicked over when somebody was upset, but one of the theories is that it could have been when if a car was backing down the driveway and knocked it over, and it did happen overnight, the same night that the family car disappeared. So.
Then moving on, and law enforcement notified, and I'm assuming that's law enforcement all around, that there had been this motor vehicle incident in California involving the Harts, and you were notified of that.
Yeah, so late in the afternoon, as you heard the other officers testify, it went off into the evening down here in California. They were doing the recovery, attempting to recover the vehicle and the people who were in the vehicle. At that point, they're just starting to figure out, okay, what's the license plate, who's this car registered to? The next day is when we were contacted by the sheriff's office down here to help with the investigation, because they had learned that there was a family and that they believed that it was a family of 8 and that there were at least 3 people who were missing at that time. And so they asked for our help again to try and see if we could figure out where the 3 missing children were, and or if there was some kind of explanation. Like they testified there weren't skid marks, there was some strangeness about the site down here that they had questions about.
All right, and then in fact, did you conduct another welfare check at the Hart residence?
So yes, the sheriff's office went and found that there was nobody at the house. There were several animals that were left behind, and it just looked like the house was abandoned.
All right, and we are going to have, as I indicated, somebody from the California Highway Patrol as the lead investigator in this, is going to tie up a lot of loose ends that you may have, and I don't want to pick on Detective Beck because there are some things that happened down here that he's not aware of, obviously. But what I do want to ask is, you mentioned as part of your investigation, did you learn that the Harts had some dogs?
We did. We checked the house, and from what we could determine, there may be some dogs that were still missing that may have been with the family in the car.
All right. And with respect to any other pets, when you went to the house, were there other pets inside the house?
There were other pets inside and out. I can't remember off the top of my head, but we had animal control come out. I believe there's some ducks or some chickens, and take possession of them to make sure that they were taken care of and fed.
They have some cats as well.
Possibly. I don't remember.
At any rate, they were in the house. We will get it out of Inspector the Slates. But did you have an opportunity to walk through the residence and make some observations?
I did. Detective Swinson with her office was the primary one at the house. Eventually, we ended up serving a search warrant at the house, which allowed us to collect evidence from the house and really document it. He walked through and took lots of pictures of different rooms, food in the refrigerator, the milk date. The date on the milk in the refrigerator was still current, and everything in the house looked relatively normal and clean. And I did walk through the house too.
All right. I think of some significance in your reports, and it may be in the investigators' Slate's report, as well as the fact that there were toothbrushes and a number of things in the residence that remained that perhaps indicated that somebody left very quickly without taking toiletries and that kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah. It's hard to say. The house was definitely very neat and orderly. There was also luggage in the garage. Typically, if a family will leave, they'll pack their clothing and items in the luggage. Toothbrushes left behind, food in the fridge, and then, like you said, there were several animals that were left behind too.
All right. And now moving on to March 29th as part of your investigation. Is that when the search warrant was served on the residence?
Uh-huh.
And was that your search warrant that you had a Washington State judge sign and you
Yes, that's
conducted?
correct.
All right. In addition, there were other search warrants, I think, that took place. So as you say, one of your fellow detectives took a number of pictures. Did you seize any laptops, any pieces of communication, cell phones, anything such as that?
Yeah, so at the time, part of our investigation was to see if we could try and track where the family had been. And so one way you can do that is through bank statements or credit card statements. There were several bills, credit card bills, bank account information that we collected. We also collected some laptops, I believe an iPad, some other stuff that we would later process to try and get some clues as to maybe where they went or why whatever happened, or where the missing children may be.
And did you? I know I've seen it in the Officer Slate's report about research that took place on some of those devices. Did you review any of the research that was done on any of those electronic devices, iPads, or anything such as that?
No, I didn't. We collected them, and I wrote search warrants for them, but then the data was then sent to Officer Slates, who was the primary investigator.
Okay, good. That's we're going to count on Officer Slates for lots of information. That's something that we will certainly do. All right, then on 3:30, there is an entry about some financial leads. Can you tell us, as part of your investigation, what that entailed?
So again, Detective Mitchum in our office is kind of our fraud specialist. He's the one who was able to track the Safeway card, and he also started diving into their financials, looking for large cash withdrawals or some sort of indication that they were expecting either to go on a trip or made hotel reservations or anything like that, and he came up empty. Basically couldn't find anything in their bank accounts or credit cards to indicate anything was abnormal.
All right, and then on the 12th of April, you have an entry, and I think you went back to the residence, is that correct? Tell us the purpose for that.
So later on the 12th of April, we went back with some canine teams. At the time, still couldn't locate the missing children, and so one of the fears may have been that something may have happened at the house, and maybe there was somebody buried at the house or something like that. So did an additional search of the property. It's a rural property. You can see on the map, it's several acres in a rural area, and so they had a couple canine search dogs, like the search and rescue coordinator described, walk around the property and see. They didn't detect anything.
All right, so essentially cadaver dogs to see if there are any bodies buried.
Correct.
And that search resulted in no information and no indication that there was any bodies or anything at the site. Is that correct?
That's right.
All right. So we've walked through pretty quickly your investigation, and I knew it took some significant period of time. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to your testimony here today that I know we've kind of done it in broad brush form, but I think it's given the jury sufficient information to kind of get an understanding of at least what was happening in Clark County and what your agency did and the follow-ups and this kind of thing. So anything else you'd like to add?
Well, the only thing that I would say is, and I said it before, is you see a nice timeline with all that stuff, but as the investigation unfolds, we didn't have a lot of the information. As we're learning it in retrospect, we can put together this timeline. But if you're trying to understand what happened and how it happened, it's important to keep in mind that as the first officers show up at the scene, they have no idea that there was a family in the car or anything, and then it just kind of evolves bit by bit, and we get different pieces of information. So this is definitely good and important, but also keep in mind that as we're investigating, we're always constantly learning new information as we go. So that's it.
What I'm going to take is we're going to take a 5-minute break, and it's a stand in your place and stretch your legs rather than everybody gets to leave and all that. So we're going to go off the record right now. There are a couple little points I want to look at and see.
Yeah, so I don't know what the part was later. The video on YouTube is just shitty. So I don't really there's nothing extra to add here. It's weird how when people say, what's the context of this? It's like, well, the title says the name. You can go look it up, right? I mean, also it's a case that everybody should have known about, but unfortunately, people were too interested in other shit at the time. I don't know what cases, maybe Kanika Jenkins or some... even when I was covering that, I was covering this one. I think this was right before, I don't know, Kanika was 2017, so I think this was 2018. So what this is the Hart family are two same-sex, I think they're a lesbian couple, Sarah and Jennifer Hart. Jennifer was sort of the dominant one, and Sarah was, sort of more passive, and they put on a facade for society for years, and they adopted these children from Texas, all minorities, and they got money from the state of Texas for each child until they're 18 years old. So they were really just used to generate cash, but they would bring them to all the little events and show, just try to act like they're so culturally aware, and they're just sort of like the epitome of what a great person in society should be like, when behind the scenes they were basically torturing the kids. They didn't get food at all, while both Jennifer and Sarah were plump. They got to eat quite a bit. They ate every single day as much as they wanted. The refrigerator was full of food, but those kids weren't allowed to eat hardly anything. And it led to one of the children actually escaped one time and went over to her neighbor's house. And those neighbors, for some reason, the parents finally came over, Jennifer and Sarah, and she changed. She goes, don't listen to her, blah, blah. Whatever it was, those neighbors didn't report anything. And then later, Devonte went over to the neighbor's house. And by the way, that last little girl, she jumped off the roof to go over and try to get some food and help. Then Devonte later would go over there and ask for food. He wanted food for all 6 kids, like, hey, can you give us food? Can you give us food? Then finally they called CPS. And CPS goes over to the house, leaves a note on the door. I think Jennifer saw it. Then Sarah comes rushing home. They all put all the kids in a car and they take off and head down to California, where at some point they loaded them all up with Benadryl and drove the van that they were driving off of a cliff, killing everybody. Except I think Devonte was killed a different time and it was placed somewhere else. Okay, there you go. There it is, everybody. You got the explanation. And this is after they're all dead, so this isn't really a trial. This is a coroner's inquest, so that the coroner can put down correctly what the manner and cause of death are. Okay, and it's homicide, right? I mean, that's obviously what this is. And so they did a coroner's inquest. It was like a 2-day thing. The videos all over the place. I'm trying to have another one for tomorrow that, I don't know, might be a couple hours or an hour and some odd minutes. I think that Slate guy that he just mentioned is on there and gives his theory on the case. So anyways, that's it. You guys. Thank you guys for reaching the goal. Very cool. Yeah, they do sometimes, yeah. This is one that needed one. Because you wouldn't want to just say, oh, it was because this is a homicide. An absolute murder of at least 6 or 7 people. It's hard to know if Sarah was sort of in the know too, or did she also get drugged and wasn't really awake. It was like a mini Jonestown massacre is what this was. Really sick. I think Sarah and Jennifer are some of the sickest people that have ever lived on the planet. I mean, they go to all these little hippie events, acting all liberal, and, oh, look at me. Oh, I'm just so woke. Oh, we got these kids. And everybody thought, wow, they're so great. And then behind the scenes, they're torturing them. No food, nothing, all for the paychecks from the state of Texas. Give me a break, all right? Give me a break. I don't have it here, Danielle. Don't worry about it, okay? I'm going to do another show tomorrow on the same thing, so I was going to add in some of my, I don't know, a couple of the videos that I made on it a long time ago. All right. I hate when people tell me what to do right in the middle of the show. It's like, Jesus, nothing worse. All right, you guys, we will see you tonight, all right? Thank you for being here, and let's see, let me get to the... Thank you to let's see. Anyways, I hope you guys, it was at least interesting to you guys. I mean, I know that the coroner, the medical examiner was kind of boring, but let's see. Diana HB, the members. I thought you already were a member. Oh, yeah, so you just did your little post there. Teresa Murray, Paulette Leonard, Deborah Blum Rogers, A Blank Slate, Kubi, K, Me, Yabba Dabba Doo, Carrie, Danielle, CR, Amber Maiden, and Annabelle Stealth. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So tomorrow there's another guy. I'm going to see if there's any more videos that I don't have. Try to put them together. I don't even know what order they're in because they didn't even list it like that, like part 1, part 2. It's just kind of these random hodgepodge clips, you know. Pretty crazy. All right. But anyways, thank you guys. We'll see you later. Might be doing some more discussion and debunking. That's always fun. I had a good time last night.
Drama.
Huh? It's the house.
Bitch, please.
Dude. Ray is so mean.
I'm tired of them 10 down 15 on the mind that I done buried on 15.
By the way, that Hey Yama is from that case.
Here's mosquitoes the size of bald eagles, and that tagged them.
Mr. Martinez, are you angry at me? 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 Mr. Martinez.